When my narrative is, the world is out to get me, it doesn't make sense. I'm a victim. I've been targeted. People are mean and out to get me, right? Well, it's gonna feel really good to me to cover up the side effects of that narrative if I say, the universe has a purpose for me. You also told me that was because you ignored certain things, and that you ignored certain things because you're stubborn and greedy. And so we work backwards from that. So I just keep asking, like, what's the worst part about that? What's so bad about that? In my experience, the best possible context for teaching is under the umbrella of mutual trust. You trust that if I'm your teacher, you trust that I'm fully in support of your personal growth with no personal agenda of my own. If we spend all of our time punching the balloon, it's still gonna come back up. It's not an enemy, it's not something to fight. Remember, these narratives are here to supposedly protect us as far as we're concerned, and to give us what we need and want.
Hey, what's up everyone? I'm sitting here with Mr. Devin Kelley. He's a coach, teacher, writer of physical and introspective practice, and also the creator of the Narrative Excavation methodology. So today is going to be a very insightful conversation. There's a lot of things that we're going to cover to do with introspective practice and how that applies to everything in your life, right? Like creating the life that you want to live and asking the deeper questions and going deeper within yourself to really figure out who you are, what it is you're here to do, and how you want to live. So Devin, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
I'm glad to talk about this specific topic.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of information and wisdom, I'd say, and experience in a lot of practices. And what I'd like to do is, I know you have like so much great results and mastery over certain things, but I want to go back to where this all started for you in terms of your background in human psychology and, you know, just mastering yourself, mastering your mind.
It's actually, I've never actually thought about where it started, to be honest. It's a good question. Maybe there's not one single point in time, you know.
Yep.
I think I've always been inclined toward introspection, just naturally. I'm a very empathetic person. I can read other people's emotions quite well, and I've always been sensitive to them. And so maybe that predisposition really helped in the initial development phase, you know. You know, even when I was running track, before I got into like explicitly introspective practice or any kind of mindfulness tradition or meditative tradition, I was thinking about running as an existential practice. That's what it was to me. It was a life practice. It was about me, my inner world, and exploring that and encountering my resistances and moving into growth internally, not only getting faster. So I think it's always been there, you know, that inclination. But as far as the introspective practice methodology itself, that came from some very specific places, like really specific modalities, I guess you'd call them, you know, like philosophy, like certain traditions in philosophy. We can get into those details, like specifically where, certain meditative practices, and then like a fellow named Baron Baptiste was very influential in his methodology and what he referred to as stories. And you know, he's connected to people like Brene Brown, which I've heard other guests of yours talk about her work. So, and I've always also been a systems oriented person. So anything that I do, I think about like strategic development over the long term. I think of myself as a strategist and a systems person. I like to build things, and I like to take them apart and see how they work and make something that actually just objectively works and produces results, like building a car engine that actually runs. That gets me going. That gets me up in the morning, along with actually helping people, of course. You know?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I remember we did jiu-jitsu together, right? And
yeah.
I had been training for a while before you started training. And then I remember we rode together, and then he just like kicked my ass. Like, I was like, holy shit. And I was surprised, obviously, but then I was like, okay, how is it that I've been training longer than you and you've come and kicked my ass and you've been training for a short period of time? And it's how you think about things, like how you approach learning new skills, like the skill acquisition side of things. And, you know, the principles, you build upon the principles and you can see how they connect to each other, right? And you were telling me this and I was like, because I don't think like that. But
we did have that talk, didn't we?
Yeah, like you just see, okay, this principle applies here, and you start teaching yourself through learning foundational principles, and you can apply that to anything, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that touches on the main point, one of the main points that I really wanted to get across when I talk about this practice of, you know, narrative excavation, for example, or any introspective practice. How to put this? I think for some reason, there's a disconnect. There's a difference between how people seem to think about psychological and emotional practice and how people think about, or spiritual practice, if you want to include that as well, and how they think about physical development.
Yep.
But for me, I've seen attribute development and learning as kind of like a process that spans or it transcends discipline, it transcends modality. So there are principles that apply across everything. And so when we're looking at developing skills like jiu-jitsu, it's very obvious. We just had this talk a minute ago. You can't tell a new jiu-jitsu practitioner, okay, jiu-jitsu is very simple. Just do this. Start at the feet, pass the guard, work your way up from the feet to the head like a ladder, and try to isolate joints and limbs on the way and stop your opponent from doing the same thing. It's really easy. Just do it. You can't just throw somebody into that ocean and expect them to swim. It's chaos. There's no direction. They have no skill sets. I see this very much as a metaphor for the emotional world. Yes, it's possible to develop a closer connection to your own emotions and awareness of them, a closer connection and awareness of your own thoughts. And thoughts, by the way, are not only linguistic, they're non-linguistic. They happen really quickly. They're images flashing through the mind. They're vague associations and creative associations between experiences that we've had that sort of bypass the rational linguistic centers in the brain. We're not thinking about a lot of our things that we think about rationally or verbally. And to get in touch with this stuff, our emotions, which also rise and fall very quickly, and they morph and change, and our thought patterns also morph and change quickly. It is like throwing somebody into an ocean and being like, okay, just fucking swim. Good luck. Or this is what you need to do. Why can't you swim? It's just about putting your right arm in front of your left arm and kicking your legs at the same time. Just do it. You know, you need more sort of like systematic buildup than that. And that's what I've done. I've noticed that there was a demand for that and a gap in the approaches that people are taking to introspective practice. And I'm like, well, what if we approached it the same way? If we just thought about it as a system that we can develop as a practice over time, break it down into less complex components, like reduce the complexity, isolate certain skill sets, isolate certain like actions and skills that we can tangibly build over time, and then integrate those with a bigger principle and picture in mind. You know, instead of just being like, you need to find your truth and follow your truth. It's like people don't know what their truth is because it's confused. It's mixed up with narratives. You know, what feels good might feel good because, Jesus, it feels good because you're masking a narrative. If I believe that I'm a stupid and boring person, right? If that's my story, I'm bad because I'm stupid, because and I'm boring because I'm stupid, then it's going to feel great when somebody tells me I'm smart. And it's going to feel great when I prove to myself that I'm smart. But there's a difference between doing something because you love and value doing it and doing something because it provides positive emotional feedback because you've covered up an emotional weak point. If I believe that I'm stupid, then figuring something out and overcoming that fear may feel good to me. But if I'm doing that thing, if I'm overcoming that fear again and again and again and seeking out reasons to do that, simply motivated by, I need to prove to myself that I'm not stupid, well, then I'm still controlled by the narrative. I'm not overcoming anything, right? So I think making these distinctions is really important when we're talking about like, okay, what is spiritual development? What is introspective practice? What is emotional growth? What is truth? What is your truth? People don't know the answers to these questions because they can't make the fundamental distinctions. fundamental distinction between what is an actual event, what is actually occurring, what are they actually feeling, what do they want, and what is a story about what are they feeling and what do they want? What is the narrative that they've told themselves about what that means and what it's doing, who they are in the world. And that is a skill set that can be developed. It doesn't have to be this kind of vague, amorphous thing that's like people say, oh, we need to do this. Yeah, but how? How do you submit someone in jiu-jitsu? It's like saying, yeah, jiu-jitsu is about submitting the other person. How? What do we do to get there? Break it down, coach. Give me a skill set. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I know there's a really long response, but
there's a lot there.
This topic, yeah.
Yeah, we can go into it. So essentially, for someone watching, we covered narrative excavation, but what is it? What's the definition? If you had to dumb it down into one sentence for someone watching who is not familiar with this term.
Yeah, it's becoming aware of the fear narrative mechanisms that create compulsive and reactive feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, and being able to move into a new space of value-oriented feeling, thought, and behavior. It's a technical definition. I know this takes a lot of unpacking, might not make a lot of sense, but that's the quickest way I can define it.
Yeah, and so what you touched on there, you said if someone believes they're stupid, they're going to do things to prove that they're not stupid. Mm-hmm. But they, in fact, still have that narrative that they're stupid, right? So then
it's a cover-up.
It's a cover-up. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, so like there's a lot of ways that we can cover up these narratives, an infinite number of ways, but the narratives are all very simple. They fall in my experience, in the system that I've developed, as far as I can tell, and I've tried to prove myself wrong over the years, but as far as I can tell, all of these like primary fear narratives fall into three basic categories. One is I'm bad, which is a defect narrative, which is like there's something inherently wrong with me, the way I'm born, the way I'm built, what I'm made of. I'm defective. So as I'm bad. The second category is I'm not safe, which is a threat narrative. And we see there's some kind of extrinsic threat to us, to our well-being. All of these can be projected, by the way, because we care about somebody else or something else. I can project these narratives onto my dog or my best friend or my partner. But anyway, you get the point. So there's I'm not safe, which is a threat. I'm not going to have enough money. I'm going to run out of resources. I'm going to starve to death. I want to have shelter. Somebody's going to hurt me emotionally, physically. There's a threat coming at me. Third category is I'm alone. And I'm alone is an isolating narrative. We believe that there's a disconnect or that we are isolated and separate. And this hurts. We want to be connected and we want to feel part of something and have a purpose. And so I would classify these as I'm alone narratives. And so narrative masks, as I have called them, are a way that we can sort of mitigate the negative effects of these beliefs while still holding the beliefs. Because we think, and I heard another guest of yours, Gabby Francis is her name, she spoke about payoffs, right? What's my payoff for this? I think the mechanism here is, as she touched on it correctly, which is we believe that these narratives are helping us. That's the fundamental belief. We not only helping us, but we think they're necessary, that we really need them in order to just be baseline okay and get by and get what we want and need. And so what do we do with that, right? So because they're creating all of these horrible side effects in our lives, they're sabotaging us in many ways. And we feel terrible when we believe them in some ways. In some ways they feel good, but in most ways they have pretty bad side effects. So the way that we mitigate those side effects is we come up with narrative masks. What do I feel like, for example, when I believe, when my narrative is, the world is out to get me, it doesn't make sense, I'm a victim, I've been targeted, people are mean and out to get me, right? Well, it's going to feel really good to me to cover up the side effects of that narrative if I say, the universe has a purpose for me. Everything has a purpose. Right? It's going to make me feel better. It may be true. It may be true that there's no coincidence in the universe and everything has a purpose, but that's not how I'm using it. I'm using it as a mask to cover up my fear that actually the universe has a vendetta against me, that I'm a target. and I'm at risk. I'm not safe because people are out to get me. The world is out to get me. My environment is toxic, whatever it is. And so the mask, I have a purpose. Everything is a growth challenge. Can be a mask for that.
But how does someone distinguish between, okay, that's the mask, and this is, because that's subconsciously you believe that, you know, you're a victim in this world, but consciously you're like, oh, the universe is going to manifest. I'm going to manifest all this crap. How do you distinguish the subconscious from the conscious?
How to distinguish the subconscious?
Yeah, because that's the subconscious belief that you're a victim, but people don't say that because that's just
it's hidden.
It's hidden.
Yeah, it's subterranean.
So how does someone become aware of that to then know, oh, this is a mask?
Right, and this is where the terminology that I developed comes from. When I say narrative excavation, it's meant to evoke images of bringing something up from the soil, something that's underground and can't be seen. It's a subterranean structure, and the way that I've seen as the best way to do that is through using at first objective measurements and tools, and so here's a criticism of a lot of very sort of analytical and heady psychotherapy practices, right? That they're all up here, and that they're not really feeling and intuition based, and they're bypassing our emotional centers and so on and so forth. And I believe that's a valid criticism. It's true. But the problem is, like I said before, when you're helping someone to develop a skill set, you can't throw them into an ocean and expect them to just know how to swim. I mean, maybe they'll figure it out, right? But a lot of people are, especially if the waves are big enough, they're not going to fare well. So what I think is that helping people to develop a measurable and tangible skill set is where we start. And we do that through rational linguistic tools at first. And so, for example, I have tools called, in the practice, I refer to them as narrative indicators in language. And there's a bunch of categories of words that we use or phrases that we use or sort of idea structures that we use in the form of thought that immediately should be a flag for what is not an event, is not real. It's a story that we're telling ourselves about an emotion or about an event. And we start with baby steps. So I tell people a fictional story, for example, and I'll say Mary lives in an apartment building. Mary's not a real person. Say Mary lives in an apartment building, and she wakes up in the morning, she looks in the mirror, and she sees that her hair is a complete mess, and she left her makeup on from the night before, and she thinks, why am I such a chaotic mess? Why can't I just get my shit together? And then she washes her face, does her makeup, puts her hair up in a bun, gets her clothes on, walks down the stairs, sees that she's in an apartment building, so she sees that her neighbor tipped over the trash can once again. Her neighbor's a drunk, always tips over the trash can. Whatever, pay no mind to it. Goes down the stairs, walks out the building, trips and falls, lands on her hip. Bruises her hip, but she doesn't stay down for long because Mary is the kind of person to always pick herself back up when she falls. And so she continues on, gets on the bus, and goes to work. This is an example of a made-up story I would tell somebody, and I would say, okay, now you tell me which of the things in this story are an actual event that occurred, objectively speaking, and which of these are a narrative about the events that are occurring. And we start there. It's like separating it's a rational linguistic skill set. And so this is a baseline for people to start to use when they get caught up in the emotional ocean of introspection. It's hard because we want to attach to the narratives. We want to attach to our feelings about what is true. Because we believe that it's necessary. We believe that these beliefs are necessary to protect us, to get what we want, to get what we need. You follow me?
Yeah.
So having a basic, fundamental, step-by-step, simplified, reduced complexity, rational linguistic practice, and building the skill set gradually over time, getting more and more personal, integrating the emotional aspect more and more, integrating intuition more and more. Doing this systematically is, I think, really the answer because, like you say, people are simply not aware of it, right? So how do we bring awareness to people who are continually walking around with a fishbowl over their heads? All they know is the fishbowl. It's not an easy thing, and it requires a systematic approach. We can't just throw vague amorphous terms at it like truth and expect it to have any effect. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't have any measurable effect. Not durable anyway.
So you think someone like that, the story you just explained,
Mary?
There's a lot of Marys out there, you know. I'm working through. I'm not saying that I've figured my shit out. Like, I'm still working through it. But it's like the awareness is the first step to solving any problem, right? So that's step one. Is that something you agree with, or what would you say to that?
Sure, I would agree with that statement. Yeah. I think the first steps of the practice really are about bringing awareness that the narratives are actually there. Because for most people, there's no separation at all. There can be no awareness of something that has no separation. So it's like, for them, the narratives are the reality. There's no step in between. It's not like, I thought that I'm too skinny. It's, I'm too skinny. It's the reality.
Yep.
So initially, it's about creating that distance and thinking, this is a thought that I had, or this is an emotion that I had, but it's not my identity. I don't need to make it a permanent and perfect belief about myself and who I am in the world, or about the world itself and what that means for me. So yeah, I think that is the first and most important step, is just becoming aware that there are narratives that are essentially shaping our every perception. Yeah,
because the events are the events. Like, an event is something that happened, but it's the emotion we attach to the event, right?
Yeah, do you have a pen? I used to do this exercise with students when I was teaching workshops to demonstrate the impact of narrative, right? And really what role it plays in our moment-to-moment perception. And so this practice, the narrative excavation practice, is concerned with a specific type of narrative. We're not trying to get to the bottom, philosophically speaking or metaphysically speaking, about truth, like real truth. I mean, what is a table, for example? That's not a question. Is this really a table? That's not a type of question that this practice would be addressing. It's a more pragmatic practice. And so there are some narratives that are just, they're pervasive, but they're just concerned with basic functions, like calculating the weight of a glass when I pick it up and taking a sip. What's the texture of the glass going to be like, that expectation? Or how much does it weigh? How much fluid is in it? What's the dynamic? How much strength do I have in my hand? How much am I going to have to exert to pick it up? These are all stories, essentially. They're templates of interpretation and expectation that we impose on reality. We don't really have direct access to reality. So it can be tempting to get caught up in that game, when we're doing narrative excavation, because narratives are everything. We only have perception, subjective perception. So that's not what we're concerned with. We're concerned with a specific kind of narrative, which is specifically narratives that form in response to trauma. And trauma I can define loosely here as any experience that's characterized by fright, fear, anger, sad, or physical pain. And these are the experiences in response to which these kind of narratives arise. And they start to form a pattern. And it doesn't really matter what the initial trauma is, for example, but it's more about understanding the pattern and how it has become integrated into our daily perceptions. So to make this distinction between what is an event, which was your question, and what is a narrative, it's useful to be able to draw a hard line here for people so they can see, because they're going to want to, when it comes down to these fear narratives specifically, the ones that form in response to trauma, I'm bad, I'm not safe, I'm alone, they're going to want to hold on. They're going to want to stay attached to the narrative, because remember, they think they need them. So in order to break them free from that, in order to give them the ability to create that distance, we need to be able to draw a hard line. And that involves separating our perception from all narratives, right? So here's one. So the students wouldn't know I have two pens, by the way. They would only know that I have one. And so they'd be sitting on the floor, and I'd be sitting with them in front of them, and I'd say, okay, here we go. So you're going to tell me whether this is an event or a narrative, okay? A fact or a narrative. So I would say, I dropped the pen on the floor. Is that an event or a narrative?
event.
An event, right. For practical purposes, that's absolutely true. And that is what we're concerned with the practice. Not like, is this a pen? What am I? Does I exist? Like, those are not questions that we're concerned with. Those are philosophical, metaphysical questions, existential questions.
Yep.
So yes, that's right. But then I would say, okay, now turn around. Look at the wall behind you. And you can do it if you want to, right? And then I would say, I'm going to drop the pen again now, but I want you to turn around and look at the wall behind you. Are you ready? And they would turn around, look at the wall behind them, and then I would hide the pen, and I would take out the other pen from my pocket, and then I would drop it on the floor. And then I'd say, okay, you can turn around again. And they say, I dropped the pen on the floor. Event or narrative. And they'd say, event, right? And I'd say, when you said that, when you said I dropped the pen on the floor was an event, you thought of it as the same pen, right?
Yep.
That I just dropped a minute ago. And they'd all say yes. And then I'd take out the other pen from my pocket. And they say, oh, is it an event or a narrative now? Right?
Yeah.
It's a narrative, right? It's a
story, yeah.
It's a story. And so that's what I mean by this kind of practical distinction between events and narratives. We're using narrative indicators in language, and we can go over some of those categories if you want to make objective distinctions between what is actually occurring and what is our story about what is actually occurring.
I like that because you're breaking it down. So now you're helping people distinguish between, like you just said, what's happened and what's the story about what just happened. Like making that distinction, and through that process, one gains awareness over, you detach from the event, and you now notice the story that you're making about the event. Like something bad happens, like for example, when I was a kid, I was at school and we were in this race, and then I don't know, I think someone tripped me up, and we were on tarmac. And I just went flying head first and just fell on my face.
Yikes. And
my forehead half my forehead just cracked. Not cracked open, but it was a massive scar, right?
Uh-huh.
And then I was screaming, and then my mom had to come off work, and she was like super terrified. And, she was like, what happened? And then after that, I had got glasses because apparently I was clumsy. I don't know. I must have fell over my own feet. I don't know what happened, but what I made that mean is I'm clumsy. And that's a story that I created when I think I was 7 years old.
Sure.
And I've carried that out until, again, like you said, most people walk around with a fishbowl over their head. So they're not aware that they've had this story for years, and they've just been acting in accordance to that narrative. And that was me. And then now I had to go into that. Okay, where did that happen? Like I just told you where it happened. And then now I'm like able to separate from that story.
Yes.
Like I'm no longer clumsy. I'm not going to fuse with this false narrative about myself.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it's good that you had the experience or awareness or inclination to go into that story, because most people don't. It's actually quite shocking the extent to which most people are completely unaware of this phenomenon, and that they are influenced by their thoughts in this way, and how it's shaping their self-perception, their perception of the world, and the dynamic in between. It shapes everything. So yeah, it's great for you that you're beginning on this kind of awareness journey, because it can change everything. It really can.
How long have you been doing this practice for? Narrative excavation.
Doing this kind of practice, well, it's evolved over the years. So in the form it is now, I think probably I solidified it maybe 5 years ago, but I've been doing roughly this practice, this kind of like introspective narrative uncovering process for probably 10 or 11 years now. I started in 2011, 2012. So 10 or 11 years. And but I've been teaching it. I started teaching it briefly after that, so maybe 3 years into the process. So I've been 7 or 8 years. I've been coaching it.
Was that ever your plan to teach it, or were you just initially doing it to master yourself?
Well, I wouldn't say to like master myself, but I was curious, and I was noticing the impact It was more like that, more like immediately I noticed the impact, and I was like, wow, I feel way different after having seen what I've seen. And then if I integrate this like systematically, like I've done with my other practices, like I was a track athlete, so I know what it's like to build up a skill set. Luckily, I had that experience going in, and I was like, I can actually develop this as a systematic practice. And then I noticed even more impact, so I was like, this is amazing. I feel way more free from the constrictions that I was placing on myself, and how much stress emotions were coming up for me from day to day. Even just walking to the grocery store, I was a wreck. I was so anxious all the time, and I was suffering, really, just walking into a supermarket. I would suffer, and with all the things that I was telling myself. Highly introverted person. I had a really hard time in public spaces, and also highly empathetic. So when I would get a sense for somebody else's emotion and it didn't line up well with me, something felt off, it would disturb me. Really, I took everything personally, and it was not great to be me in a lot of ways. And then I found this kind of work, and I was like, my God, like, it's so simple. I don't have to live that way anymore. So it wasn't like I was trying to figure anything out or master anything, or and I didn't even want to be a teacher. I didn't have that in mind. But I fell into the demand of it because, I don't know, I just don't see anybody else doing this in this kind of systematic way. At least I haven't met anybody or heard of anybody. So, yeah, and then like my teaching skill set transferred very well over to this, and I just naturally fell into it. I've never advertised this practice publicly, really. I've mentioned it. I mentioned that I do it, but I've never advertised it as a service or anything. I really just accumulated my students through word of mouth. It's like month after month, somebody refers somebody else. Their friend or their sister or their wife or their husband or their girlfriend or whatever. So yeah, no, I didn't plan on being a teacher, and I didn't plan on anything really. I just found this kind of insights through various mediums and then developed it from there.
That's amazing. So you just basically fell into it along the way, and through noticing the changes in your own life, you started going deeper into the practice, and then so people started reaching out to you, or how did, I'm curious, like, because obviously you're studying it by yourself, applying it to yourself. Did you then share it with someone, and then they showed an interest, and then you coached them through it? Or?
Well, it's funny, initially I started, so I wasn't doing one-on-one coaching in this practice initially. I was only teaching it in group settings because I was already traveling teaching workshops in the yoga setting. So I was a yoga teacher at the time. And I would travel to these studios and do like 3-day workshops, 2-day workshops, 5-day workshops, 7-day workshops. And I started to think to myself, like, why am I only teaching, let me phrase this better. Why am I not teaching the thing that has made the most difference in my life? Why am I leaving that out of my teaching experience? And so I started to incorporate small modules, whether it was just like 30 minutes at the end of a session, or one whole day of the 5-day training focused on this kind of thing, or 2 days or whatever. And that's when I started teaching the methodology in groups. And I learned a lot in that process, made a lot of mistakes, and developed the method a lot through that feedback system. But then eventually I started realizing that there was a tremendous opportunity and potential for coaching one-on-one with people. And that's when I had already accumulated a lot of hours of experience, and I developed the methodology pretty well by that point. So I started offering it, like I would talk to somebody online, and I would say, like, I remember my very first student actually that was one-on-one and not in a group setting. His name is Justin Wolfer, and Justin reached out to me, and we were having discussions about his, like, just our lives. We were just talking casually, and I was like, he was sharing some of his struggles, and I was sharing some of my challenges, and it came up that he was looking for like a way to go into practice methodology. So basically I charged him dirt cheap for, I think I was, at the time I was charging him like 10 or $20 an hour to do this kind of work. We were doing 2 calls a week for like a year straight. And that was and I took on other students during that time as well. After I realized that it was having an impact for him and he was really benefiting from it. But that was the transition into coaching. It was very organic, like sort of like I was already teaching workshops, and I was like, why am I not doing this thing that really has a profound impact, for people? Why am I leaving this out? And then I was like, well, why am I not reaching out and doing this with people one-on-one? And then from there, from Justin, I got other references, and then also I got opportunities to teach in person at a retreat event. And it was an event for coaches specifically. So all these coaches, I took them through a little bit of narrative excavation practice. I explained what it was. I did some examples of an excavation dialectic process with them. And they were like, wow, this is profound. This is amazing. Sign me up. And so then I started working with coaches on this, and then they referred other people, and it's blossomed from there. But it was never like, it was kind of accidental in a lot of ways, the transition into coaching it.
That's awesome. So you were teaching yoga before, and then at the end of the classes, you would add in some narrative excavation work.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. But then you realize, like you said, why am I not teaching the thing that's transformed my life the most?
Exactly. Yeah, it was a moment for me.
That's a cool realization, though, because a lot of people, I think, would go through their whole life. I heard this quote once: the worst thing in life is to get older and realize you got good at the wrong thing. So it's like you live your whole life doing something that is not really the thing you want to do, but you're good at it, so you justify it. And I've met so many people like that over the years. But I'm curious, though, going back to when you were talking about who you were before you started diving deeper into introspective practice. I was curious, what was your most dominant narrative? Your most dominant fear-based narrative that you had at the time that was causing you to be anxious?
I'd say there were 2.
Okay.
Yeah, and still are. They're present, but the difference is that I'm very fluent in their language now, and I can spot them very easily, and I don't react as much anymore, and I catch them faster, so on and so forth. But yeah, there were 2 primary narratives there, which was I'm not safe because people are emotionally unstable or immature. Like people are essentially, in like 10-year-old language, it would be people are crazy, and so they'll hurt me. Not because they're mean or that they're trying to hurt me, but it's that they're crazy and they don't know what they're doing, and they're going to hurt me. And so I'm not safe because people are crazy and will hurt. They're emotionally imbalanced, whatever. They'll hurt me. And then let me think, because there are tertiary narratives too, that are more peripheral. But I'd say the other big one is like this is going to seem out of context, and I'll have to explain it a little bit. But it's I'm bad because I'm evil like my grandfather. Which is like, so there's a whole set of personality traits that I assigned to that. And so basically growing up, my mother, I didn't never know my grandfather, my real grandfather. He was apparently, according to my mother, a terrible person. I don't know, very abusive in multiple regards. And she would tell me stories about how bad he was and how narcissistic he was and how insecure and selfish and violent, and I was horrified. I was like, that sounds like a terrible person. And somehow, some way, I don't remember how, but I got it in my head that I was just like him, and that I was a reincarnation of him, and that I had inherited his genes, like his temperament. And so every time that I had a violent thought, every time that I reacted to somebody, or that I was mean, or every time that I felt short-tempered, or every time that I was too self-centered, I would tell myself this story. I'm evil just like my grandfather. And it's a form of defect, personal defect. So I thought that I was, like it's a horrible person deep down inside, and that's who I was genetically. That's my makeup. And I believed it, and it pervaded my psychology for decades. Yeah, so those were probably the two biggest ones. There are other peripheral narratives, but...
So it's interesting what you said there, that you're still dealing with them. Like you still have them. So someone listening, they're like, oh, well, what hope do I have then? Because I got way more than two. You know, like how do they, how do you work through that to, for these narratives to have less hold on you over your life?
Well, that's I like how you put it. That's a great point. It is about having them have less hold over you. It's not about them disappearing. And one of my earliest teachers in sort of mindfulness practice, under the Baron Baptiste methodology, I remember her name was Sally Gambrell, and she had studied with Baron quite a bit, gone to a lot of his trainings, and so she attributes this analogy to him. So I'm not sure, I didn't hear it from him firsthand, but he used this analogy of a clown punching balloon. So you know these balloons, that the children's toys that stand up and they're weighted at the bottom, and so you punch them in the face and they hit the ground and then they'll stand back up. Yeah. It's a game. So the narratives are a lot like that. Because we have certain triggers for them, because certain things bring up them, as when we lose attention for just a moment, they'll come up in a subtle way, and maybe not always in like an overt reaction, like an overt behavior or choice, but in a facial muscle, in a breathing pattern, in a sensation in the body, in a subtle way that we hold our body posture. It manifests, it comes up. And so in my experience, it's like this. If we spend all of our time punching the balloon, it's still going to come back up. It's not an enemy. It's not something to fight. Remember, these narratives are here to supposedly protect us as far as we're concerned, and to give us what we need and want. So spending all of our time treating it as an enemy and punching it in the face only to have it pop back up with the same stupid clown face on, it's not going to do anything. We're just wasting our time, and we're creating an enemy and occupying ourselves with fighting them. And on the other hand, if we just accept that it's there and we listen to everything that it says and we believe it, then that's equally pernicious, right? That's also a problem. That's just believing the narrative is true, the clown whisper in your ear. But on the other hand, there's a third option, which is like putting your arm around the clown and sort of accepting its purpose. It's a mechanism, right? It's there for us, and we believe that it's helping, but it may be like a friend giving bad advice, you know? Thank you, but no thank you. Great intention, but I'm good. Maybe I can make this choice over here instead. And that metaphor, or that analogy really always stuck with me, because it's true. It's not necessarily that the narratives will ever completely disappear. They might pop up on an unexpected occasion, or when we're least expecting it, or when we're really vulnerable, really sleepy, didn't sleep and really tired, pushed to the edge physically, chemically imbalanced for one reason or another, and just boom, thought it was mastered, and then there it is again, popped up, starts whispering in your ear. So that's the bad news. Yeah. But the good news is that with this kind of systematic practice over time, if you're doing it well, one marker for doing it well is that the narratives do come up less frequently. And not only do they come up less frequently, but when they do, we're able to acknowledge them right away, catch it early, faster, and then work through it faster as well. And that involves processing it on a non-verbal, non-rational level as well. Because early in the practice, it's quite clumsy as we're first developing the skill set. It's like doing a move in jiu-jitsu. You're like, okay, first I put my hand here, and then I put my wrist here, and then I grab this way, and then I push this. It's very awkward and step by step, and and then eventually it's like armbar. You know, so, and we don't think about it step by step, rationally, linguistically, do this now, put this here. It's more like I have an intention of where I want to go, and it's very quick. It's an internal process it's an intuitive process. And so that's the good news, I think, is for people who think that there's no hope because it's always a process. Yes, it's always a process, but there's progress, right? like a professional gymnast is never perfect. They may get a perfect score, but it's never perfect. You know what I mean? But they get better, measurably. We can objectively say, they've developed these skill sets over time. They can do a more complex skill. They can do it faster. They can do it higher. They can do it more aesthetically pleasing, you know? So although there's never perfect and the narratives might always present themselves, there's many metrics according to which we can progress objectively and measure that progress.
So you learn how to deal with it better because of the skills you develop that help you notice the narrative, and it doesn't really affect you that much as a result of the skill acquisition you've developed in learning how to deal with the narrative.
One way to think about it is we just don't take it as seriously. You know?
Yeah.
It's like you ever have a friend that flakes on you all the time?
Used to.
Yeah. Or an acquaintance?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, how many times before you're like, yeah, when he's like, I'll be there at 12, and you're like, yeah, sure. You know, how many times does it take before you reach that, yeah, sure? You know, it's a few, but you get acquainted with his habits, with his patterns, and then eventually it's like you don't hold his word with the same weight. It's the same with the narratives. Once we uncover them and we see that they're not giving us exactly what we thought they were, and the reward isn't exactly what we thought, or at least the reward comes with a certain price or side effect that we're not willing to pay. So we notice it, notice all those consequences laid out on the table, and then we also move into what's possible when we're free from that influence, and we start to get the positive feedback from that. I stepped into my possibilities. Now I'm starting to get the sense of what was available to me that wasn't available before, and that tastes good. I want more of that. So it's a gradual process of becoming aware that the narratives are not producing exactly what we want, or what we think we want, and noticing their price, and then noticing what's available when we're free of them, again and again and again and again and again. And eventually we realize, like the friend who never shows up, we don't have to take it seriously. Like it's not true to its word. Oh, there's that silly thing again. And instead of like, sinking feeling when one of these narratives sets in, you're like, oh no. Right. Oh shit. Here it goes again. It's like you can feel the spiral coming on. And that's the process that can eventually be broken by acknowledging the early signs, systematically developing an awareness of that, so that we can say, there it is again, silly me, instead of, oh no, you know.
What about the knee-jerk reaction, the question that people ask themselves, like the language they use? So for example, say an event happens, fuck, why does this always happen to me? You know, like the language around the meaning that they associate with the story. Like, why does this keep happening to me? Like, they ask themselves a question that's not empowering, and then they find an answer that feeds back into the narrative that they are trying to, like, diminish the effect of. Yeah,
100%. So what do I think of the language around that? Well, I think a lot of people are misguided in this regard, especially when we're trying to employ language as a practice in itself. Language is a symptom. Language is a symptom of our psychology. It does shape our psychology in turn, again, when we use language, that's true, and that's what people are noticing. They're saying, when I use certain words repeatedly, it definitely reinforces a particular thinking pattern or belief or emotion. True. But focusing on a symptom is like treating a symptom of an illness, right? We're not addressing the root mechanism. What I'm aimed at is the root mechanism, the narratives. So I'm not saying that adopting a language regulation practice or an experimental practice around language, like cutting out certain words or intentionally changing your language, is bad. I'm not saying that. It can for sure be useful, but only when it's seen in, otherwise it can be misleading if it's not seen in context of the deeper mechanism that we're trying to impact, right? So it's like, makes me feel is a really common one that we see in a lot of life coaching and New Age spiritualism these days. You know, when somebody says, like, nobody can make you feel, right? Try cutting out the term makes me feel in your language. Okay, fair enough. Valuable suggestion. But what is the mechanism that's driving that language, that's driving that belief that somebody else made me feel something? Because you can cut out the language all you want, but if you never address the mechanism, you're going to find another way to say it. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but even a step back from that, though, most people believe that. Like, oh, he made me feel. Like, you made me feel happy. You made me feel that way. If you weren't here, I wouldn't have felt that. So you made me feel that way. Is that a truth, or is there more to unpack there?
Is that a truth that people think that way?
Well, is that a truth in that you can make me feel an emotion? Is that true?
Well, it's not that simple, right? So it's about stimulus and response.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe in this particular circumstance, what was required for a certain emotional expression was the stimulus and my response. We're both responsible for that. True. Maybe without your stimulus, I might not have felt that particular thing in that particular moment. But also, there's the other mechanism that's in place, which is the interpretive mechanism or the narrative that's inside of my own cognition that's causing me to interpret something how I did and then make a decision to react. And when I see it this way, something really interesting happens, because I can sort of detach myself, not in like the emotional detachment way, but I mean literally detach myself, my own reaction from what you did. Because I can see that you could have done the exact same thing, but if my interpretive mechanism were different, if I had a different narrative, then my reaction would have been different. So then I start to question, did he really make me do that? Did he really make me feel that? And the answer has to be no. Because when I changed the interpretive mechanism, I changed my reaction. It's just a matter of providing people with evidence that they can do this in any particular case. So yeah, true, there may be certain cases that, like, you know, somebody has a repetitive behavior that's causing a reaction in you. And it may even be that that behavior is not in line with your values. You don't want to be around it, or you don't want to, you know, entertain it, which is perfectly within your rights to do, to set boundaries based on your values. But your reaction to it in the moment is yours. And that's based on your interpretive mechanism. And that's the hard line that we draw. So
that's a really hard concept for a lot of people to comprehend, especially in a relationship dynamic, like with a partner. You know, it's like you have an argument and then it's like, you made me feel this way. And it's just back on, like, that's another thing though, is I just want to talk about the values, because within the relationship, these arguments, if one is not aware that, you know, you cannot make me feel a certain way, it's from my internal, like, how I interpret that. And so I generate that emotion myself. Not, you didn't generate the emotion in me, I did myself.
Right.
But if you're with a partner and she can't understand that, then it's like, for me, for example, I try to hit her with the logic. Like, I explain this to her and it doesn't work. Because, you know, when you're triggered, you're in that emotion and you can't distinguish, like, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Like, I made myself feel this way based on my narrative that I have, that I'm either not safe or alone, or, you know. And so people can trigger their own narratives. Like, I can trigger your narrative. That's a fair thing to say, right? Like, I can say something that will trigger a narrative that you have about yourself.
Yeah, you can provide the stimulus.
The stimulus, yes.
Sure.
Yeah. So how do you deal with this within a relationship? I know that's a sidetrack, but just something that came up is, how do you handle this? Yeah,
I think it's a great question. It's something I haven't really talked about before publicly. The first thing is, like, it's never is a strong word. It's not really, in my experience, it's not advantageous to address somebody else's narrative patterns and sort of make them take accountability for them in the heat of a reaction. So when she's had a reaction and you are actually what she sees as the stimulus for for that stress emotion.
Yeah.
And you made me feel this stress emotion, whether it's fright, fear, anger, sad, or physical pain. Well, she's already decided that she needs to interpret it that way for her own well-being. Or he, whoever you're with. I'm just talking about your specific case. Like, so she's already decided, right, that that's the way she wants to interpret it. And so you're telling her in that moment, you're wrong, and you need to change the way you're thinking about it. When she sees the way she's thinking about it as not only correct, but also necessary for her. So she's already emotionally triggered in terms of her stress response, right? And now you're telling her she's wrong. And now you're telling her she also needs to give up this thing that she thinks she needs. It's not going to turn out well most of the time. So, in my experience, if you are trying to bring awareness to your friend or partner's or whoever's process and hold the space for their self-awareness to lead their growth, it's best done in a context where they trust that you are standing up for only their growth and that you're not self-interested in the matter, if you're not just trying to manipulate them or stop them from having a reaction to you. Because part of your response to her was probably fueled by, fuck, I don't want to be around this crazy person right now. She's having a reaction. It's irrational. It doesn't make sense. I'm going to explain it to her so she gets it, right? That's coming from your own self-interest. Like, that's not standing up for her growth. That's like, treat me better so I feel better, right? So coaching or teaching, in my experience, is best held in an environment of trust, that they trust that you are standing up for solely their growth, and that's the only reason you've shown up there. And two, willingness. So they should be asking you or coming to you and saying, you know, Aaron, I've been noticing this thing, or I feel really disturbed about this, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on it. Or they might notice something about you, like, wow, I really look up to how you handled that situation. I noticed that you had a lot of composure there when I would have reacted. How did you do that? And then that provides an opportunity and space for leadership, for coaching. And I think a lot of people make this mistake in relationships, and it's so easy to fall into that trap, to want to coach somebody else when they're clearly being reactive, when they're clearly stuck in their own story or narrative. It's tempting to want to be like, let me fix this, you know, let me show you the correct way to look at it. But it's rarely ever effective. Does that kind of answer
Absolutely,
your question?
No, 100%. And that's actually why I used to do that, because that was also my ego too. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to set her in her place, you know, like.
Yeah.
But now I I don't do that anymore. Like I'm over that. I'm not past it, but I'm able to deal better with when I'm triggered, when she's triggered, you know.
Mm-hmm. Are you aware of the narrative that's causing that impulse to correct her?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm just aware that I want to be right. I want to be right. And the ego says I want to teach her a lesson.
Right. So my suggestion here is that in these kind of interpersonal conflicts, there's a deeper layer of narrative there. Like, I want to be right and I want to correct her is not deep enough. There's a reason why you feel that you need to be right and you need to correct her in this moment. It's because you feel one of those three ways, right? I'm bad, I'm not safe, or I'm alone. And this is a way to correct that.
Oh, I'm alone. That's what it is.
Yeah, tell me more.
So now I've had the awareness, like, this was a past relationship, but a partner has to have similar values to me. So if they don't, then they won't have the awareness to be like, you know what, you handled that situation really well. Like, how'd you do that? That's a value of growth. Like, I want to grow, right? And so I seek out women now who have similar values to me. So the I'm alone thing is like, I don't know, I haven't really I'm going into it, but I think it's to do with a support thing. Like, when I was younger, you know, like, feeling supported and feeling loved. Like, if she's not willing to understand herself more and I'm trying to facilitate that, then she's not willing to grow with me, which means I'm alone. Like, you know, it's a subconscious thing, but as I'm voicing it, I'm trying to see the connections between what I'm saying.
Yeah, if you wanted to go deeper on that, we could even use the dialectic process to uncover more layers there, but only if you're interested.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So we can, and after this too, we can talk about what the dialectic process is and how I developed it, if you want. But basically, it's just like a strategy of question and answer, and sort of key questions that I ask that try to get to the root of whatever it is that you've convinced yourself is true in this particular case. So we start with the strongest impulse, the strongest emotional response. So either fright, fear, anger, sad, or physical pain. Can you remember a moment that you felt one of those emotions particularly strongly, in a strong way, in this particular situation?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I'm given the silent treatment in a relationship, that triggers this. That's like the biggest thing that will piss me off. Like,
okay.
That's even saying it just brings up that emotion,
Yes. No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And so from there, you can try to ground yourself in an actual experience, like a tangible space that you were in. Like literally try to remember where the windows were in the room. What did it smell like? Textures, fabrics, people's clothing, facial expressions. What did you feel like? Like actually try to ground yourself in that moment when you had that elevated stress emotion, so that we can connect to what you were thinking at that time. You feel me?
Yep.
Okay. So in that moment, when she's giving you the silent treatment and you feel that stress emotion rise, what's the worst part about that? What does that mean that she's giving you the silent treatment?
It's just disconnection. It's just like, I'm alone. Like I'm with someone, but I'm alone. Like that's the worst feeling.
Alone. Okay. So you're with someone, but you're alone. Alone how?
Well, there's just no connection. Like, she's physically there, but she's not there.
She's physically there, but she's not there, and you want her to be there.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is that so bad? What's so bad about that if she's not there with you?
It's the narrative, right? It's that narrative of, well, I don't know what the narrative is actually. Just like,
don't be so quick to jump to the narrative framework.
Okay.
Just step by step.
Okay.
Like when you think about that moment when you told yourself, she's not here with me, she doesn't want to be here with me. What does that mean for you? What's the worst part about that? Why is that so bad?
I've done something wrong to make her treat me this way.
So you're imagining that you're at fault.
Yeah, I'm bad? Yeah. I don't know.
Is there a specific thing that you imagine you might have done, or that she perceives that you've done? Or is it very vague?
No, it's always her trauma playing out. Well, it was past tense.
What do you mean?
Like her reaction to, I'm just doing things as I normally do them, but certain things that I did, she would react negatively to.
Okay.
So if she would expect something of me and I didn't do it, then she would give me silent treatment, for example.
Okay. But you tell yourself in that moment that you did something to provoke that. And that's the reason why she's reacting.
Correct.
Okay. So the worst part, would it be worse for you if she's right and you did something wrong? Or would it be worse for you if she's wrong and she's just giving you the silent treatment?
Yeah, the latter.
The latter, if she's wrong about that. So this tells us something, because I just gave you an ultimatum. I said, is it worse if there's actually something wrong with you? That's another way to put it. Is it worse if she's right, if there's actually something wrong and you did something wrong? Or is it worse if she's wrong and there's nothing that you did wrong? And you said it's worse if there's nothing I did wrong. So that tells me you're not worried about being bad in this particular case. You're not mostly worried about some defect in you, because for you, it's, well, maybe tertiarily, maybe secondarily or tertiarily, you might be concerned about that. You might be thinking about things that you might have done wrong. But what you seem to really care about in this situation, correct me if I'm wrong, is her reaction. She's mislabeled you. She's misunderstood. She's decided that you did something wrong, but you didn't.
Exactly.
So what's so bad about that? if she decided you did something wrong and you didn't?
It's because I think about, my mind goes into the future. And so I think that's what it is. Because in that moment, I'm like, I can't be with this lady. Like, she's just, if this keeps on happening, like, this is not how I want to have a relationship. So those thoughts influence how I feel in the moment.
So would that be the worst case scenario for you if this stuff kept on happening and she kept acting this way?
I just feel more disconnected, less confident in myself. And I'd make it mean so many things about myself.
Right. Okay. So all of that, and you said a lot there. If you had to summarize all of that, what do you think the worst part about all that would be if it continued into the future? What would be the worst thing?
I'd hate her. No, I don't know.
That would be the reaction, yeah.
The worst thing would be we just wouldn't be that connected. We wouldn't have a deep emotional connection because every time I did feel like I was walking on eggshells with her because of that. Like, I don't want to do something wrong because again, I don't want to get the silent treatment.
Yeah. Okay. So it's clear that you really do care about that sort of distance, like missing connection.
Yeah.
Right. But you also said that you worried that it might damage your self-perception too, right? That it might cause you to lose confidence.
Yes. Question myself. Like,
right.
Fuck, am I doing the right thing? You know?
What's so bad about that if you start to question your confidence?
I lose my confidence, that's what happened actually.
Okay. So if you lose your confidence, let's say it's true, you're going to lose your confidence and you're going to stay in this horrible relationship. You're going to lose your confidence. What's the worst part about that?
I lose who I am, a sense of self.
You would lose a sense of who you are?
Yes.
And if that's true, then what does that mean?
Starting over from square one.
What do you mean lose a sense of self?
Just losing, like who I thought I was. Like, oh yeah, I can achieve so many things. I'm confident that I can, pursue new things and get better at them, and do whatever I want to do in this life.
Okay, so is it safe to say that the worst part about losing your sense of confidence in self is that you wouldn't be able to move forward with the things you want to do in life? Is that how you would put it? How would you put it?
Yeah, like if I don't have any confidence, I don't know who I am.
Yep.
Like, where am I going to find the drive to? Where am I going to find that?
You're not going to know what to do.
To do something, yeah.
Is that it? Is it a feeling of being like lost and purposeless?
Losing myself in a relationship is a big fear of mine.
Losing yourself. And is that what, is that how you would characterize what that means? Like losing myself means also like, what does that mean? Does it mean like not knowing what actions to take? Not having a sense of purpose or direction?
Yeah, like losing my purpose.
Yeah.
Within a relationship. So going with a woman and then me just saying, hey, fuck all my dreams. And just being like docile and not do anything.
Okay. Yeah. So you would fall into a state of directionless apathy.
Yeah. Oh, what are you up to tonight? Let's watch some Netflix. Like just live that life.
Stagnant.
And I actually, my dad's going to watch this, but that links to my father.
Okay.
I didn't think I was going to go here, but I will,
It's funny about this practice. Even the smallest thing can unravel into.
Yeah. It's because that's actually something I want to cover with you is, so my motivation, like I love my father and he actually wanted me to be an entrepreneur because he's one that started my career off. He took me to an event which opened my eyes to this whole new world. Yeah. You can make money on the internet and you can live wherever you want. But he didn't follow that path himself. So he's just stayed in a job that he doesn't really like and, he's just living that life. And that's not the life I want to live. So my motivation is to not live that life that he's living. And so it's oftentimes, I think, the opposite of what your parents have done. Like, let's say if your parents are not living the dream life that you envision for yourself, then that gives you the drive and motivation to do the opposite. And I think that's the case in most people's lives.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use fear as a motive.
Exactly. So I want to talk about the fear, the motives of why we do things.
Yeah.
So that's actually a really fascinating topic for me personally, because that's what I'm doing more. It's just diving into why I do what I do at a deep level. Like, so why do you do the things that you do? That's a broad question.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you so passionate about narrative excavation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Happy to answer it, but let's pin down let's pin down your narrative first here, because we started the process, so I don't want to leave it.
That's actually
out in the
what
air.
I do. I deflect a lot, and I can't deflect against someone who knows about this stuff. So
if you say so. Well, you're not deflecting now, so we're going to go into it. So the question is, like, because you gave me a lot of good information there about your dad, and saying, like, I don't want to end up like him. You know, I don't want to be stagnant. I don't want to be purposeless or aimless and just kind of settling for a suboptimal, path. I want to be purposeful and moving forward. So here's the way, like, the I'm alone narrative is super interesting, because it takes on often this facet of purpose. Purpose is interesting for human beings because, in a way, our sense of purpose is like a best friend. It's like a close companion to us, and it guides us, and it offers us direction, and it gives us a sense of fulfillment. And when that is gone, we have this profound sense of just floating in empty space. Just empty. Utterly isolated. And so that's why I've classified this kind of talk about I'm going to have no purpose. I'm going to be lost and directionless. I tend to classify this as the I'm alone narrative, because it's the same feeling, It's that feeling of floating in space and like feeling like this anxious sense of I have nowhere to go and nothing to do and no meaning at all. And I'm stuck. You feel me? Does that resonate at all?
I can see what you're saying, but I feel like there's a lot of people who feel like that, so I'm not alone.
That may be a mask.
Maybe.
Right? Does it make you feel better when you tell yourself that?
Yeah,
there are lots of people who feel that.
Like, if I have no purpose, then I know exactly who to hang out with.
Yeah.
I can go and hang out with them for movie night.
A sense of like reckless abandon, right?
Right.
Yeah. But in those specific moments, when you're feeling that sense of elevated stress emotion, like, oh my God, I need to escape my father's path. Oh my God, I need to, like, I can't have her ignore me right now. We're going to end up completely disconnected, and I'm going to be in a relationship where the person's not there with me. I'm going to have no real connection with them, and I'll be trapped in this kind of stagnant reality where I'm just like my father, right? Imagine those moments of elevated stress emotion and what you're telling yourself in those specific moments. What's the feeling? Is it a sense of aimlessness and having no one by your side and no sense of direction? Or is it a sense of threat? Like, is something coming at you and trying to destroy you? Or is it a belief that you feel there's something wrong with you that's causing all of this? You're the reason why you're purposeless. Or
it's that. It's definitely that. Yeah.
So that would be the worst part about having no clear purpose or direction forward. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Because I'm causing all this.
And that's what you tell yourself in those moments?
Well, I believe that.
Okay.
I'm like, I'm causing this reality.
Got it. Well, no, but in those specific moments?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is it that you're telling yourself is the way that you're causing that? What specific attribute of yours, what is it about you that's making you do this, according to your story?
With the example of the girl?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I fucked up a long time ago, and now it's showing. Like, I made a mistake back there, and now the mistake that I made back there that I didn't see, like the red flag back there, is showing itself now in reality.
Do you ever think? Do you ever know to yourself? Like, do you ever think to yourself what that mistake was? Do you ever tell yourself, "I made this kind of mistake"? Like, is there specifics?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about it?
Yeah. So, just noticing things, but dismissing them.
Okay.
And then later on, they rear their head again.
Yeah.
And like, oh, I just dismissed that, and now it's showing again.
So what does it mean about you if you notice things but then ignore them or dismiss them?
I'm not honoring myself. It's just a body language. I'm not honoring myself.
You try to use 10-year-old Aaron language.
I'm just not showing myself love. Like, I'm not respecting myself.
Okay, so the reason why you're seeing things but ignoring them is because you don't respect yourself. You don't love yourself. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because if I'm ignoring them when I see them, that means that my ego is taking over in that moment. Like what I want is, I don't care about this red flag that I've seen many times and I know it's bad. I'm just going to, I want that. I'm so stubborn, right? So I'm just going for it.
Okay. So stubborn, does that word land?
Yes, very stubborn.
What about greedy?
Also.
Want too much,
Yeah.
just going right for it without ignoring everything else?
Yeah.
So what's the feeling that comes up when you tell yourself this? Does it feel like when you say, I'm bad because I'm stubborn and greedy, does that feel like a knife in the gut? Does it trigger something?
Very fun. That resonates.
It does?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this is just kind of like, this is a very short, we've done this in less than 15 minutes, so it's a very sort of brief introduction to the narrative, but this can kind of give you an idea of how we would trace something from an experience of a stress emotion back to the seed narrative by asking these kind of questions. The seed narrative being one of the narratives that fall into one of these three categories. So I'm bad, I'm alone, I'm not safe. In this case, we've gotten to something like, I'm bad because I'm stubborn and greedy. And that's and then in following that, if I'm bad because I'm stubborn and greedy, that causes me to ignore things that I should be paying attention to. And that causes me to put myself in situations where I'm alone, stagnating, not moving forward.
Damn, that's good. That's a good assessment.
It's your assessment. It's your words. You told me. That's the beauty of the dialectic process, is that you offered that up, is your language.
Yeah.
You were the one who told me that you felt disconnected, alone in the relationship. And you also told me that was because you ignored certain things, and that you ignored certain things because you're stubborn and greedy. And so we work backwards from that. So I just keep asking, what's the worst part about that? What's so bad about that? If that's true, what's the worst case scenario? What does that mean for you? These basic sets of questions on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other. You get an answer, you ask the same question of that answer until you feel like you can't go any further.
Yeah.
And you get to one of these seeds, which is like, I'm bad because, I'm alone because, I'm not safe because. And what follows the because is your personal statement, like the personal way that you relate to this narrative. You feel me?
Absolutely, man. And Emil, he's not here right now, but he's emotional intelligence coach, and he does similar work. So he's been coaching me on some stuff, and yeah, it's always interesting to get coached because essentially you're just seeing connections between what I'm saying and just linking them together, and then presenting it back to me in a way which I can understand my own patterns better, because people are not aware, right? Like I wasn't aware of those things that you just brought up, that narrative. Right. I want to ask you though, I'm going to ask you about the passionate question in a second, but
yeah.
How did you distill down all of the problems we experience as humans into these three core narratives?
Time and mistakes. Originally, I had perceived that there were maybe 10 or 15 categories of these kind of narratives. And then through trial and error and testing the hypothesis, I narrowed them down and I was able to consolidate them. And then I would test that again. And then I would find that there were more exceptions. And then I would say, okay, well, these can fit into this category. Yeah, and then eventually I just ended up with 3. And I continually try to challenge that hypothesis. I try to find exceptions, and I try to find narratives that don't, fear narratives specifically, that don't fit into these 3 categories. And I can't seem to do it. I'm open to finding them. I hope that I do. The method will continue to evolve. But so far, in the last 5 years or so, I haven't found any exceptions. So yeah, it's just through a long process of refinement and trial and error and making mistakes and misinterpreting, and then through the experience of coaching and understanding the nature of each of these narrative categories. Because each of these narrative categories, I'm bad, I'm alone, I'm not safe, they have like a music signature. Like when you listen to an upbeat song, you don't have to ask if it's an upbeat song. You don't have to think about it. You're just like, yeah, this is an upbeat music. I like it. Or when you listen to a really deep emotional piece that's meant to evoke feelings of sadness or regret. We feel it. We can just kind of get that sense of that signature, right? And so I'm not saying that those transfer perfectly to those three categories. What I'm saying is that very similarly, each of these have a signature to them. They have a sort of emotional frequency. And I've found that it's really the frequency that aligns the narrative with these categories, not so much the explicit expression, because it's about what it means to the person, emotionally speaking, and what kind of impact the narrative has. So two people can say the exact same narrative, but it means two different things to them. And so you have to interrogate with many, many questions on top of questions on top of questions to really get to the bottom of what that really means to them, specifically for you. Because you notice we went through many layers, and at first it looked like it was I'm alone. And then it started to look like maybe I'm not safe because I'm going to get trapped in a relationship. And then it started to look like maybe I'm bad because I put myself here, because I'm stubborn and greedy.
Yep.
Right? So you know what I mean? It's very, I'm surprised when I have these kind of conversations with students. I never know, not never, I get a sense, but I can never really predict perfectly which turn it's going to take or which narrative category it's going to fall in. I have to ask the questions. I have to go through the dialectic process.
And I'd add to this, so there's a therapist in England, her name is Marissa Peer. I'm not sure if you've heard of her. But anyway, she's like quite famous. She wrote a few books and stuff. And her thing is everyone at the core has a I'm not enough story. And that's what she argues to be true. Like at the core of everything, it's just I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough for this or this or this or this. And so your narrative excavation is that I'm bad, I'm alone, and I'm not safe, right?
Yep.
So would you add in I'm not enough, or do you think that those three cover the I'm not enough story?
Yes, I think that the I'm not enough story can fit into one or multiple categories. And I think, I'm not familiar with this particular woman or her work. I've never read anything from her. But if it's as you describe, if she's saying that everything boils down to centrally an I'm not enough narrative, I disagree. I think that they have distinct signatures, these kinds of narratives. I'm not enough, for example, can fall into a category of I'm bad, depending. Like if it's like, for example, I'm bad because I'm ugly, like I have some kind of physical defect that makes me unattractive, then that would be I'm not enough. Like you can tell yourself I'm not enough for my partner because I'm not good looking enough, right? But that's I'm bad because I'm ugly. Right? And maybe the worst part about that for you is that personal sense of defect. Like there's something wrong with me physically and people can't accept that. They're not attracted to it. And that's the worst part, right? But maybe for another person, that might mean the worst part about that would be being alone. Like it's not so bad if you have a personal defect. Maybe it doesn't bother them if their nose is fucked up or they've got like some kind of weird ear thing or, their face is not aligned in a way that's attractive. Shape of their head is askew. Who knows what they're telling themselves is true about their appearance. But the worst part about that for them might not be the actual physical defect. It might be the consequence of the defect, which is like I'm alone, right? If I'm not physically attractive, then people might leave me. They won't want to stay with me. They'll eventually not be able to deal with my physical ugliness, so they will leave. And so then that falls more into the I'm alone category. And this can morph from moment to moment. So if I believe that I'm ugly, in one moment, the worst part about that might be like me looking in the mirror and saying like, oh, fuck, there's something wrong with me. I'm defective as an organism, as a person. And then in another moment, I might be more worried about somebody leaving me because I'm ugly. So you see what I mean? It's like, I just feel like trying to boil everything down to I'm not enough. Okay, not enough in what way, specifically? Like, it's got to be I'm bad because, I'm alone because, I'm not safe because, and the specific mechanism that we've developed over time. And I just don't see I'm enough as covering the category, for example, of I'm not safe. Does it? I mean, it doesn't. I can't see how it does. I can't see how I'm, like, for example, if I'm in a bullying situation and I think, like, maybe I'm, like, in a physical bullying situation where, like, I'm walking down the street and a group of young guys is, like, together and maybe they have knives, I don't know, maybe they have weapons hidden, I don't know, but they're starting to get an energy where they're like, hey, what's up with this guy, you know? What's up with you? And I'm like, oh, nothing, hey guys, I'll just try to walk by here. And they're getting confrontational and they circle around me and they corner me and they're trying to intimidate me. And I tell myself, I'm not safe because I'm in physical danger. They might physically hurt me, right? How is that covered by I'm not enough?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But that's a moment in time where that's very contextual, right?
Let me give you another example.
Okay.
So, like my personal narrative, for example, I'm not safe because people are emotionally unstable and will hurt me. They'll lash out at me. They'll yell at me. They'll manipulate me. They'll lie to me. I'm worried about the harm that they will cause me. The feeling of being attacked, like getting pinned up against a wall and somebody yelling at me.
Yep.
Somebody being crazy and lashing out. I feel like there's a threat to me.
Yep.
An emotional threat, a physical threat.
Yep.
But it's not as tangible as being cornered by a group of young guys, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, but at no time in any of those circumstances where I feel like I'm being attacked, am I telling myself that there's something wrong with me? I'm telling myself that there's something wrong with the world.
Right, I see.
The world is dangerous.
Got
the
it.
world is attacking me. They're mean. They're bad. They're crazy. They're unstable. They're going to hurt me. That has nothing to do with me not being enough. You feel me?
That's so super interesting because as you say that, I'm like, I don't see it. I see it the opposite way. I see it as I'm not good enough to deal with the crazy world.
Right. That's why narratives are so personal.
Right.
Because the same statement means two different things to two different people.
Which is why I like jiu-jitsu, because of that. I'm like, that situation you just said, like, that's why I train jiu-jitsu, because that situation can happen. Mm-hmm. And if it does, I'm going to break their fucking neck. That's pretty much how I view it.
Yeah.
That's my narrative.
I'm not strong enough.
Right.
Yeah, I'm bad because I'm weak.
I can see how the two different narratives play out. So I agree with you. Like, I'm not enough can't be a blanket statement for everything.
Yeah. It's not the central mechanism. It's one central mechanism for sure. I agree. Yeah. And which is, I would categorize it as either I'm bad, mostly. I would say it fits into that category, and sometimes I'm alone. Yeah.
So I'm alone, I'm bad, and what's the other one?
I'm not safe.
I'm not safe. Mm-hmm. So
I'm in danger.
These three narratives, like, everyone experiences one of these three things. Like,
or all of them, yeah.
All of them, yeah. All the time. And so someone's listening. What would be like some quick thing you can give someone, like an exercise that they can do to start uncovering their narratives? I know that's a big question, but maybe there's something as easy task they can do.
I think there's a couple things that are essential. One is this kind of practice is not going to be very effective if you have no skill, space, or time to introspect. And we have to develop a sensitivity to our own feeling in order to do that, or at least it helps us a lot. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest doing simple things, really, really simple things, like sitting down and wearing a shirt, for example. As I'm wearing this shirt, right, I can do something simple like move my right shoulder, just slightly. And as I move my right shoulder, I can feel the fabric brushing against my skin and moving in specific places. I can feel the fibers of my muscles inside my body moving and contracting. I can feel sensation in my neck, right? And so just doing something like that, focusing your attention on a specific internal experience, can develop such a skill set that's very valuable for introspection, because we need that ability to be able to pause and say, like, what am I experiencing right now? To isolate a certain feeling and experience, and to say, like, okay, I'm going to feel this now. What is it like? What's the texture of it like? Is it a tingly feeling? Is it a hot feeling? Is it a pain feeling? Is it a, like being able to classify it and describe it to yourself and just even stop to feel it for a moment is so essential. So I would say that's like almost a prerequisite skill. And the extent to which you have this and develop this is the extent to which you're going to help yourself tremendously in any introspective practice. So that's not directly related to narratives, but it's an important skill. Secondly, start paying attention to the difference between events and narratives. Just this basic distinction like I did with the two pens. Like, do you know that Karen is cheating on Kyle? Or did somebody tell you that Karen is cheating on Kyle, right? Or is that something you decided? And what does that mean? What's the story about the event? What is actually physically occurring? I dropped the pen on the floor. Event. Keep it really simple, really straightforward. And start simple, and then you can progressively amplify the intensity of the emotion, progressively amplify the complexity of the situation, until you can reliably distinguish between what event actually occurred and what is the story that you're carrying about this event. What is the meaning that you're making about this event? So that's number 2.
Cool. So just to summarize, so the first one you said is to start developing your ability to feel, like even down to like moving your shoulder, closing your eyes and moving your shoulder and noticing how that feels. And then the second thing is just distinguishing between narrative and the event and the narrative. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very easy. Well, it's a very simple task, but very powerful when people actually implement them. Right.
And then thirdly is directly related to the narratives. Ask yourself the question, when you catch yourself in a stress emotion and you've noticed that you're reacting to something, which is like fright, fear, anger, sad, or pain, some variation of those, there are infinite variations of those. Whenever you catch yourself in this kind of reaction, or even if you just vaguely feel like stressed or anxious about something, use that as an opportunity. Start reframing those experiences as opportunities to look inward instead of an excuse to be upset and perpetually stay upset. Instead, say like, what am I telling myself here that's generating this stress emotion experience? So, and the way that you can get down to that answer is using questions like, what's the worst part about this for me right now? And accept that all of your answers are going to be within the sphere or context of a narrative. You're trying to classify the narrative. It's not reality that you're describing, but rather your story. So in order to describe the narrative, you ask, what's so bad about this for me right now? What's the worst part? And then you'll get an answer. And you'll say, well, the worst part is fucking Joe doesn't care that I lent him a book and he never gave it back to me. Okay. So what's so bad if he didn't give the book back to you? What does that mean? Well, it means that he doesn't care. Okay, why is that a problem for you that Joe doesn't care? What does that mean? Well, it means he doesn't value our relationship, and I'm putting a lot of effort into a relationship. I care about Joe. Okay, so why is it so bad if you're putting effort into the relationship and Joe isn't, and he doesn't care? Well, it means that my effort isn't reciprocated, and Joe's just going to keep taking and taking and taking from me, and I'm never going to get anything back. What's so bad about that? Why is that a problem? Well, it means that I'll always be spending my resources, and I don't have enough. I don't have enough of those resources. I'm going to eventually go empty if nobody gives back to me. People are going to steal my resources. They're going to steal my time and energy and attention because they're selfish. Okay, so if everybody's selfish and they're going to steal your resources, so what does that mean? What's so bad about that? Well, it means that they're a threat to me. It means they're going to steal what I have, and I'm never going to get it back. I won't have enough. I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to run out of energy. I'm going to run out of money. And then I won't have the things that I need. So I'm not safe because people are selfish and they'll steal from me. You see, so it's like, start with the questions. Notice the stress emotions. Use that as an opportunity to ask questions. What am I making this mean at the moment? And don't look for a rational answer. Don't look to figure it out. You're never going to figure it out. Don't expect the answer to be rational or necessarily even linguistic at first. It can be a vague feeling. But look for an answer. And when you get that answer, ask the question again. and again and again until you finally get to something that looks like it can't go any farther. Like, this is the worst thing. There's nothing that's worse about this. There's no what's so bad about this. This is the worst thing. It's that I'm isolated and nobody cares about me, or it's that I'm under threat, I'm under attack, or it's that I'm defective personally. Those are the three stopping places that I've found. All the fear narratives that we experience in response to trauma and we carry around all boil down to these three categories as far as I've experienced. So use the dialectic process, use the questions, use the stress emotions as a way in to find what are those narratives, what are the consequences for you, and there's steps and steps beyond this as well, and uncovering our reactions and their consequences in our behavior and thoughts and feeling patterns, outlining those and seeing their price and what we're expecting to get out of those behaviors. There's a whole body of work that can be done here. But the first step is to find the narrative and notice that it's a narrative, that it's not true. It may coincide with truth, right? If I say, Aaron, I feel like you're condescending me right now. There may be some truth to that. Maybe you intended to condescend me. But that doesn't excuse the fact that I'm telling myself that story as well, and I'm making it mean something to me. Right. So yeah. But those are the three simple steps that people can start to take without much guidance from anyone like myself.
Yep.
They can just start to notice the difference between events and narratives. They can start to feel the sensations in their body, take pauses during the day to feel something. Breathe, feel the breath, feel the body's skin texture, feel textures of external objects, touch something and pay attention only to how it feels to touch something. Bring yourself into sensation and narrow your focus so that you can pay attention to sensation for a given period of time, right? And then thirdly is start to use the question and answer, the dialectic process inside of yourself, to use stress emotion as an inroad to inquiry.
Those are very good tips for people to do right now. Like, they can just literally write those questions out. Like, they answer one question, why is that bad? What's so bad about that? And just keep going, right?
It's a great journaling exercise, yeah.
Yeah. Really powerful too. I've done that before on certain things, but yeah, it's a practice. You got to keep consistent with it. Otherwise, you can find yourself easily numbing these fears. I guess they're fears, right? Like the three core fears.
Yeah, it's a fear of being bad, fear of being alone, and fear of being in danger.
And these are all traumatic experiences some of us have. Like, if we were abandoned when we were a kid, then we're going to have that fear of being alone, or I'm bad because of this, and then that could mean that I become abandoned again.
Right, it's connected to our experiences, but these narratives are not necessarily caused by our experiences, because different people interpret experiences differently. Like, why is it that one person will say, I'm an alcoholic because my father was an alcoholic, and the other person will say, I never drink because my father was an alcoholic? Trauma has different impacts for different people, and it's not necessarily the origin of a trauma that matters the most. It's about the meaning that we make around the trauma and what we decide it means for us.
Right.
And then that's what narrative excavation is focused on, is uncovering that network, that root network of narratives that form from that seed. Because the seed is ambiguous. Yeah.
I had a narrative, I'm not sure if I shared this with you, but since I met you at Nirvana, I realized after maybe a year or two that I had a narrative that I'm not flexible.
Okay.
And no wonder why shit wasn't working, because I believe that. Like, I'm just subconsciously not doing things because I believe, I'm not flexible, so I'm not going to do the work. It's kind of like, I've had clients say like, oh, I'm meant to be fat because I've been fat my whole life. So of course they're going to find ways not to eat well and not to do the workouts because they believe that at the core of their being.
Right. Yeah, and most of these beliefs, if they're having a pernicious effect and if they're causing a lot of stress emotions, then they're usually tied to one of these three categories. So like, I'm not flexible would be tied to, who knows? You'd have to ask, what's so bad about not being flexible? Right? What's the worst part about that, about not being flexible? And then you'll see the import it has to you. Why is that so impactful in my day-to-day experience? Why is that perception so pervasive? Why is it causing so much stress in my life? Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I can do the work on that afterwards.
Yeah.
I can just go and journal on that. But this is good. It's bringing the awareness, because this is what I think everyone needs, myself included. You know. So I was going to ask you, why are you so passionate about narrative excavation?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said before, and I'll tell you a quick story about how I developed the dialectic process.
Yep.
And so dialectic, for people who aren't familiar with the term, it more means like in the philosophical sense, it has a very strict definition, but I mean it more loosely here. So dialectic is more sort of like an agonist-antagonist relationship, like a question and answer, for example. That's one form of agonist-antagonist that helps us to get closer to synthesis. So that's like the Hegelian sense of dialectic, right? Is like agonist-antagonist synthesis, right? So the synthesis is sort of where we arrive at in terms of the insight that comes from that question and answer process. So it's like basically just a back and forth to help us uncover something. And where I first discovered this kind of methodology, like first was in the Socratic dialogues, when I was studying Socrates in my university, when I was studying philosophy. And I just remember being so impressed and like struck by what he was doing. Like he was having these conversations with people and leading them into absurdities or contradictions, and showing them where they were lacking knowledge or experience, or their perspective was flawed, or whatever, only through asking questions. Really, I mean, he would ask leading questions, of course. The Socratic dialogues are very biased, but it was really just a question and answer process. And so at the time, I was tutoring philosophy and logic in university. My professors had asked me, like, hey, we need this for some students, because there are some students who struggle with philosophy and logic. They're not always easy subjects for people, and we could use someone in this tutoring role at the center at the university where they do tutoring. Would you be willing to fill that role? I said, sure. So I went through the training program, and I did it because I was quite successful in my studies at university. I was doing well in the courses and, getting A's in these philosophy and logic courses. So I agreed to do it, went through the training program, and I started working with students. And I noticed that they were so tuned out, like they didn't want to be there. They would show up like, oh, fuck, I guess I've got to do this to pass the class, but can you help me? I don't know, I just don't get it, But oftentimes it was a matter of they just weren't engaged. I would say I didn't work with anybody who was just incapable of understanding the material. It's just most of them, like 90% of the cases, they just simply didn't care enough. They weren't to engage. They didn't have a reason to find it interesting. And so what I noticed I intuitively started to do was ask more questions. And then when I started to realize this worked, instead of like lecturing to them and like writing up on the board examples of like, here's how you do this proof, and, I would just do almost nothing but ask questions. And then I realized I was doing it, and I started to do it intentionally. I was like, what if I were just to play Socrates in this case and not give them anything? How long could I go in a session before we really reach an impasse? Before the student really can't give me anything back, and I actually need to input something other than a question. So I would challenge myself, and I would go for an hour or 40 minutes without giving them anything, only asking questions. And I found that they were so much more intrigued, so much more engaged. And of course the questions matter. You have to kind of make it exciting and, make them do some work and stuff. But I found that it was a way to have them arrive at the answers in their own way, without telling them the information. The information wasn't landing. They'd been given the information. They needed something else. And so I found that they were not only able to arrive at an understanding of the subjects, like how to do proofs or how to remember the history of German continental philosophy, but not only did they arrive at an understanding of the subjects, but they arrived at their own unique individual understanding that they could say in their own words, and they really understood it. And so I was like, oh, there's really something here. And I remembered that when years later, when I was writing the book for Narrative Excavation, the textbook for my one-on-one students. And it always informed my coaching style in Narrative Excavation. I just asked questions. And eventually, through that process, I started to refine it and narrow it down over time to the most effective questions. And I would notice patterns. Like I keep asking this same question over and over again. Maybe there's something to it. You know, what's the nature of this question? Why is it producing such a reliable effect every time when I ask, what's the worst part about that? If that's true, why is that so bad? And I came up with a list of like 3 or 4 questions and variations of those questions, subtle variations based on what the person is saying, and feeding them back a little bit of what they said combined with the question in order to lead them in the direction that I wanted to go. So I found that I was really only asking questions after a certain time. And that's how the dialectic process evolved and was born, just by wanting people to arrive at their own understanding of their narratives, and not me tell them, like psychoanalyze them and tell them what they're thinking and feeling. Like, you give me information, Aaron, about your dad. You give me information about your girlfriend, and I'm going to be like, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. This means you're anxiously attached. Okay, thanks, you know. Cool. You know, but there's no real intuitive understanding on your part. I want you to arrive at that. And so that touches on, you asked me like what, right? Like,
yeah, what makes you so passionate?
What makes me so passionate about it? And that's one of the things is I like to see people click and get it. Mm-hmm. I really love it. I love to see people grow and fulfill their potential through understanding something. It really gets me going. And I feel like the narrative excavation methodology is a manifestation of that desire. It's just the best way I've refined over time how to teach people this in a way that really nurtures authentic, real, durable, tangible understanding, you know, and that gets me going. The second thing that keeps me going in narrative excavation is just like it's a system. Like I said, like building an engine. I'm interested. You know, I want to build something that practically runs and works. And I love taking apart the pieces and the system and actually rearranging things and making it better, more efficient. That also really gets me going and inspires me. That's something I'm excited to wake up for in the morning. So I'm a systems guy, and I'm also a growth guy. I want to see you understand, and I want to see it click, and I want to see you grow, and I want to see you take it and run. Like, the biggest compliment a student could ever give me in this practice is like taking the work that we've done together and then just making it into their own thing, so much to the extent that it feels so integrated I don't even recognize it anymore. But I see the result. I want it to click, and then I want it to be integrated, and I want them to take it and run. Yeah, like setting, I don't know, I'd imagine like it's like the same feeling as like watching your child run for the first time. Like put the steps together and take those first running steps. It's clicking, you know? And they're like, and you ever watch a kid run for the first time? It's just fucking pure joy. They're like, oh my God, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
This is crazy. And then bam, and they fall, they smack their face. That's what I love to see. I love to see people in realization, actualization, joy, capacity, power, terrible, dangerous power. I love it. I love to watch that.
To see your students really own what you've taught them in their own way, not to be a carbon copy of you, but they've taken what you've taught them and now they've applied it how they want to apply it for their own goals, whatever that is for them.
Yeah, I feel so excited when I read my students' writing, and it sounds different than what I've said, but it captures the same idea. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, that's a really fucking interesting way to put that. And only they could have put it that way, you know, in their experience. And I'm like, that's like, oh yeah, that's like good nourishment for me. And that's what I value. That's one of my values. And notice that has nothing to do with a fear, right? Neither of these, like wanting to take apart an engine and put it together and make it efficient and watch it work. Watch it actually work in real practice. That's why jiu-jitsu is so fascinating, right? Because you take it apart into isolated pieces and you train the pieces and you repeat and you put it together and you look at the principles. And then in the end, you can fucking kill somebody if you wanted to, right? It's about who can submit who in the end.
Yeah.
Does it work?
Right.
That's fascinating to me. Does it work? Can I put it together? Nothing to do with fear at all. Nothing. It's nowhere in sight. Same thing with watching other people thrive and grow. Nowhere in sight. I love it. But I'm not afraid if they don't. So what? A lot of people don't. A lot of people born, don't do shit, get old and die. Happens.
So where's the fear narrative for you in terms of your applying it to your career? Like, how does that show up?
What fear narratives are present mostly around my career?
Yeah, because you're talking about, like, you love this aspect of when students get it.
Yeah.
But where does the fear creep in terms of your career?
Same narrative that I mentioned before. This is really common. I'm not safe because others are emotionally unstable and will hurt me. This comes in the form of criticism. I don't really get much criticism for the narrative excavation practice because it's not really out there in the open much. But in terms of my physical practice coaching, and when people become aware of narrative excavation, they're like, they'll say things like, "Well, you seem awfully triggered by that comment, bro. Why don't you spend some time excavating your narratives?" Looks like someone's practice isn't working. So they'll say stuff like that, and mainly the narrative that comes up for me with criticism is like, oh, people are fucking crazy. They don't understand. They're just out to hurt me. They've got their own issues, their own triggers or whatever. They can't handle themselves. They can't stop themselves from coming into my space and just attacking and vomiting everywhere. And so I'm not safe because I'm under attack. I'm under attack from these irrational, crazy critics. So that's one that I have to deal with on occasion. And that would sabotage me if I weren't aware of it. Just an example.
You do get some critics, though, on your Instagram.
Lots, yeah.
Yeah, which is fascinating to me because, usually, like, you've got a lot of followers, and I would think, I don't follow anyone who I would criticize. Like, I just don't want that energy. But for some reason, I don't know what this is. I haven't put my finger on it, but I just thought I'd talk about it now. Like, I've noticed that there's a lot of people, and Dominic has the same thing too, what he used to. Yeah. Like, they just want to attack him. I'm like, is it because you're talking about issues that are very triggering for people, or is it, and it's because you clearly set your stick in the ground, like, hey, I stand for this. Like, is that the reason why they're attacking you, or what do you think it is?
It's a great question. Thank you. I like that. It got me thinking. Yeah, I think it's mostly about tone. Like, so if you look at, like, I remember reading this book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Book, yeah.
Pretty cool book. Showed me a lot of insights about a lot of things. And one of the things that he mentioned was that there was somebody else, I can't remember the person's name, who came up with this system of dividing what people, like, into percentages, what people care about in communication, whether it's like how much do they care about verbal, like what is actually being said, how much do they care about nonverbal, which is like body posture, like, and how much do they care about the tone of voice, and also nonverbal would be like facial expressions and whatever. I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's really high. It's way disproportionate. People care way more about the non-linguistic facets of communication. They pay more attention to, and they care more about, supposedly, this tends to agree with my experience. They care way more about things like body posture, tone of voice, the way you're expressing something rather than the actual thing that's being said. Because if people paid really close attention to what I'm actually saying and were like objective and sober about it, it would be really hard to disagree with what I'm very careful about my statements. I think like a chess master about what I put out there. I'm 19 steps ahead already before you even come into my comment section, usually. I'm not saying I know everything, but I've thought a lot about it, guaranteed, if I'm putting it out there in public. And it's usually pretty solid, like really, really solid in terms of its integrity of the message. Yeah. So it's not that. I don't think that they're like, yes, I take a strong position on things, and yes, I say things that can be confrontational for people, but if I were to say them more in like the nurturing grandmother way, I don't think people would have as much of a problem. I have that side to me. I have that side that can be quite nurturing and friendly and supportive and soft, and when I need to be. It's not like I don't have that tool in my belt. But I also have this side to me that's like the warrior teacher, right? I have this side to me that wants to hit you upside the head to teach you a lesson. I want to knock you down, you know, and then see your reaction. You know, I want to see how that helps you grow, because sometimes some lessons can only be learned that way, only. That's the only way to get slapped upside the head by somebody, you know, really.
like Will Smith did.
I don't know if I don't know if that was really a teaching moment for him. I think it's more just a moment of personal weakness. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's. I think that's what it is. I think people have a reaction to that type of teacher because of the tone. Because I come out ready to knock someone on their ass and say, "What did you learn?" You know what I mean? I don't mind bringing that sort of warrior energy to the mix. You know, if you go out and spar, if you're going to learn a martial art, you've got to spar, right? And you're going to get knocked down. And there's got to be some big bad motherfucker in there who's been at it for a while. You know what I mean? Who's got a skill set under his belt, and he's going to knock you down. Like, you've got to learn. You've got to learn some lessons just by being confronted, by going through trials and hardships and being challenged in a way that you don't want to be challenged. You absolutely do not want to be challenged. You want to fight against it. You want to blame the other person for ever thinking about challenging you in the first place. Fuck this guy. Why did he push me down? I'm going to kill him. You know, he should never have existed in the first place. He shouldn't have been born. He's wrong. He's a racist. He's a terrible person. You know, like, that's the impulse. You want to point back at the teacher and say, it's your fault that I'm feeling stressed. It's your fault that I have to confront this right now, and I didn't want to, right? So I think that's the impulse. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that this is the only approach that should be used or at any time. Like, I think this is Dominic's learned a lot about this over time. You know, he's grown a lot too, but I think for a while this was maybe the only card in his hand. You know, this kind of like, this is how it is, fuck you if you don't care, you know? And very sort of aggressive pushback energy. I've always had both up my sleeve. I understand how to hold both energies in flow, and I can hold the space in a very sort of like nurturing grandmother way, like I said. But I tend to not shy away at all from being that sparring teacher who really needs to push your edge. And, you know, and send you out into the wilderness for an uncomfortable period of time, or to say something that really pushes your button, or to slap you upside the head with a wooden sword. I'm okay with that, and I'm okay if you hate me for it for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even if because I've had motherfuckers come back after like a year, 2 years into my direct messages on Instagram after being triggered what I said and like unfollowing me and saying like, fuck you, I disagree with everything that you've ever said. And then they come back a year later or 2 years later and they're like, you know what, man, like, I have to tell you, I've been sitting with this for a while. And I'm not making this up to make myself sound like a hero. I've literally received this message verbatim from multiple people. Like, I've been thinking about what it was that triggered me about what you said, and I realized that you're right. And I changed this behavior of mine, or I looked into it deeper, and it really had a profound impact for me. It really changed something, and I wanted you to know. And I'm like, cool, worth it. It was always worth it for me.
It's worth it to trigger people so they can have a closer look at the stuff that's coming up for them. And then they can, through that process, if they're willing, they can go and work on that. So you, in a sense, help them along their journey.
Hopefully. Like I say, in my experience, the best possible context for teaching is under the umbrella of mutual trust. You trust that if I'm your teacher, you trust that I'm fully in support of your personal growth with no personal agenda of my own, or very little. Like, I'm really just there to support you, right? That's the best environment. And also your willingness. You're coming to me for a lesson. You're saying, please teach me. I'm interested. Let's go deep. And then I'm there. I think that's the best possible context for teaching. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, in the public space, in the public forum, so to speak, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, any public space where people are sharing opinions, that's not the context. They don't trust me. They don't know me. You know, they don't necessarily think that I'm there just for their growth. What reason do they have to believe that? Very little. I mean, people lie all the time on social media. They pretend to be somebody else, or they lie about their motives. So they don't have to trust me, and a lot of them don't necessarily. And also, it's not an environment of complete willingness either, right? They're not coming to that space saying like, please teach me. Like, I would really love to learn. They're saying they're coming to that space either for entertainment, for distraction, maybe for a little bit of learning and inspiration or growth or whatever, but maybe they didn't ask for the lesson that I was giving them. And so that's what I mean. It's like this context. I don't want to make it seem like, for teachers out there, I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying you should be that big bad wooden sword warrior, you know, who needs to teach everything through brute force. I don't think that's the answer. I think most cases where the student is willing and is trusting, there should be a softer environment. And then there are places for harder lessons, for calling them out, for pushing their buttons, for slapping them upside the head. Sure. But yeah, in the public forum, it's a weird fucking space, man. It's really weird. And sometimes the only way to get through to a large number of people is to just come out and trigger them, you know, and then provide enough nuance and detail within that to lead them into something deeper, some kind of deeper transformation. Leave breadcrumbs after that, you know. You sneak up behind them, smack them on the ass, and you're like, yeah, you're upset, but look at all this stuff over here. And they're like, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting to get the theory behind why you're posting and, you know, how you're thinking about it. Like you purposely do things to trigger sometimes, to trigger the masses. So because sometimes I watch what you do, because people can see what you do, but they don't know why you do it. It's like I can see what a surfer's doing. He's standing on a bit of plastic in the middle of the ocean, but I don't know why he's doing it. You know, like so there's different stories for everyone. So that was cool. And I want to touch on therapy real quick, because you alluded to that earlier. You're like, you know, people can tell you something, but you're not owning it because you're being told about yourself instead of you owning it and understanding it for yourself. So what's your views on therapy?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I think it's worth talking about. Yeah. So first of all, therapy is a big field, and I can't just dismiss away. I can't just dismiss the entire field in one fell swoop, or support it and endorse it in one fell swoop either. It has its strengths. I think the many therapeutic disciplines out there, and I think that they all have their weaknesses. But I think as a general trend, the paradigm itself is problematic in a certain sense, and some therapists address this problematic aspect better than others. But it goes something like this. Therapy is a service, and that's how most people perceive it. They're hiring someone and paying them to do something for them. And that person holds the expertise, that person holds the knowledge, and that person is imparting that, right? They're conveying that knowledge to them. And that's not necessarily a problem in every context, but in the context of personal awareness and growth and creating durable and sustainable change over time in behavioral traits, I'm not convinced that it's the best paradigm. I think some therapists understand this better than others, but like most people, when they go into a therapeutic setting, to a clinical psychologist, for example, that person has like a special knowledge of a interpretive system that helps them to impose this kind of interpretive layer over the person's behavior. Like the example I gave before, So like someone tells you A, B, and C about their relationship, and you say, oh, you have anxious attachment disorder. Okay, but where's the actionable practice that person, how is that person going to understand that insight in their own specific way and then take actionable steps to adjust that behavioral trait? Where is it coming from? Where I find it, the paradigm in contrast to that, much more helpful is when people perceive something as a practice. Like when you go to a coach of any kind, like not necessarily a life coach, because that falls into a different category seemingly, a physical practice, like you go to a soccer coach. You hire a soccer coach and say, like, make my team better, coach. Or you hire a gymnastics coach and you say, get me to the Olympics, coach. We're not delusional about that in any way. The coach has a knowledge and an expertise, but in the end, you're going to have to follow their protocols, and you're going to have to show up every day and willingly put in the work. And you can understand that the practice is what gets you there. It's not the coach that wins you the medal. It's the attributes that you developed that allowed you to execute the skill set that got you the medal. So we don't seem to be delusional about that. But we kind of just expect to show up to this is what I mean about, like, it's so pernicious, this paradigm. We kind of just expect to show up to a therapy session or even hire a life coach, and we're like, make me feel better, you know? And they're waiting for the phone call. The students are waiting for the session. You know? They're like, I'll feel better after this session. And they're looking forward to it their whole week. And they're like, oh, I love my calls with Aaron. You know, he always makes me feel better. And I always feel so purposeful and goal-oriented toward my week. And then they fall back into the same patterns. And then the next Monday rolls around and they have another session with you, and they're pretty much back at the same place they were before. It's a cycle, because you're handing them something. You're telling them exactly what to do. You're giving them the answers. You're psychoanalyzing them. You're labeling them. And they're just kind of like passively accepting this and saying, like, okay, I guess I have an addictive personality. Okay, I have, avoidant attachment disorder. Okay, I'm, high on the narcissism spectrum. And then they're supposed to take it at your word what to do with that and what kind of protocols to follow. Okay, can be effective, but I don't know. I would like to see more people think of this stuff as a practice of developing attributes over time, just like we would think about developing a physical attribute. And the teacher or the coach is there to help with that process and to guide you in knowing what steps can be useful for you in that regard.
So, like, what's missing then? The fact that they're not helping you understand what your problem is, so you can own it and then help transform, like, change that.
Partially, yes. There's a certain lack of personal exploration in the process that is driven by the practitioner or driven by the student or the client, if you want to talk in therapy terms. It doesn't feel like they're driving the process. It feels like the therapist is driving the process. Right? They're getting the answers to their questions. They're getting the treatment. They're getting the service. They're going to therapy, right? No. Show up to practice. Get your boots on.
Right.
Show up to practice. We're here to work, And I'm not doing the work for you. This is not a service. I'm not your therapist, This is not therapy. You're not going to passively lay there on a massage table and I'm going to work out your knots. This is you actively changing your behavioral traits. So I think that's one way. It's just the general mindset that comes along with a therapeutic paradigm. Again, not necessarily bad in every context, but I'm outlining the shortcomings of it. And then the second way is the mindset of long-term work. Okay, so this is something I really wanted to talk about actually with you. When we're talking about jiu-jitsu or we're talking about strength training, when somebody comes in to practice, they're going to see some changes immediately, probably. Like they're gonna see, like, I'm better at this skill a little bit, and I've improved in this way. Maybe I've lost a little bit of body fat. Maybe I've increased my muscle. Maybe I've found a little bit of mental clarity and calm and peace within myself, or humility, maybe, because I got my ass beat a bunch of times and submitted. I kind of know realistically where I stand now in the physical dominance hierarchy. I have a more realistic sense of that. So there's lots of ways that we can like sort of evolve in the short term, and we can see tangible changes. But the real changes in these kind of physical practices, they happen not in the first months or in the first year or in the first 2 years. They happen 5 years down the road. When you look at somebody and they look unrecognizable to you, and they've really made a change in a way that is objectively observable, like, wow, you are a different person. That takes 5 years, bro. And people don't have this mindset. They want to go to therapy for a few months, 6 months, maybe. And they want to see this change their lives. I'm not ragging on people, but it's delusional. I'm saying this because I want to help. I want people to change their mind about this. You've got to think long-term development of attributes. You can't get strong in a year. Nuh-uh. You want to develop real strength as an attribute, real power? Oof, you better lift heavy shit for 5 years, bae. Get that done. Show up regularly, and not only like on occasion for 5 years, not like once a week, maybe skip a few weeks. It's like daily, 5 years. Show up and do it. Do the thing, develop the attribute, regularly rehearse, repeat the thing. You know what I mean? That's the main thing, is like, I think the whole paradigm is broken. We should be looking at it as practice, and we should be looking at it as long-term practice, self-accountability practice. The teacher or the therapist or the coach or whatever you want to call them is there for guidance. They're there because they've walked the path. And they can help you to avoid the major pitfalls. They can help you to save time. But they're not there to do the work for you. And they're not there to tell you anything. They're there to ask questions. And they're there to give suggestions and assignments. Assignments. There we go. Not treatment. Assignments, not treatment. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah, having that long-term time horizon is really important. And yeah, like 5 years, people are like, fuck, 5 years? Fuck, I want to get a six-pack in 6 months.
Yeah, very very short-term mindsets for most people.
But that's just how society has conditioned us. Like that's, I mean, in business, all the business guys, they're like, that's how you make money, right? Like you deliver the result in less time, right? Find a way to, how can we deliver this result in less time? That's what Amazon is. It's like, how can we get people their shit in the least amount of time possible and create the most amount of value? Like Gojek here in Indonesia, you click a button, you can get anything delivered to your house. So we're just conditioned with this instant gratification mindset. And it's just it's like a disease almost in society. So the individuals like yourself, like 5-year time horizons for mastering a certain skill, for example, like that's become rare now in our society. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree that it's rare. And I think it's not only that, I think you're right to say that it's conditioning, that our culture and our psychosocial environment is really conditioning us. But it's not coming out of the blue. It's capitalizing on nature that we already have. Like, for example, there are lots of studies done on escalators, right? And how often people will take an escalator versus the stairs that are right next to it. It's pretty outstanding how often people will take the escalators versus the stairs. We have certain mechanisms within us that want to preserve energy and to do more in less time with less exertion. For good reason, right? We can imagine all the reasons why this trait would have evolved and survived natural selection. So, yeah, it's conditioning us, But it's only conditioning us because we're not aware of those mechanisms within ourselves and the desire to take shortcuts. And then you combine those natural mechanisms to want to preserve energy, to want to do things faster, to want to get more for less. You combine those with fear narratives and boom, you've got a really powerful bomb that can just devastate people for years, decades with no progress. Yeah. So it's deeper than that. It's deeper than just saying like, yeah, our culture is conditioning us. True. But why am I not conditioned, for example? How did I escape that?
Well, this is a good segue now. Yeah. So I wanted to touch on you went to China and you were there for a year and a half, I believe, in Shanghai.
About a year in Shanghai.
And then you went and made a decision to go and live in the mountains for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And that was a conscious choice to get away from the city, to go and focus on learning more.
Yeah.
Because you were finding that you were spending lots of time making money with doing all these workshops, and then you decided to detach from that and go and do some more introspective practice along with learning and mastering your craft. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the reason I bring that up is because I find there's connections with what we're talking about in terms of like most people don't want to do that because they're so used to how they're living now. That's scary. Like doing that is scary. So therefore, I'm just going to stay in this shit because it's familiar to me. But that's the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. Like if I'm going to be alone, like all these fears come up, right? So for you, during that time you were in the mountains in China, do you think that was a really pivotal moment for your own development in terms of where you saw yourself like in the future, like 5 years, 10 years from when you were in China in the mountains?
It was. Yeah, it was extremely crucial because it was the first time in my life when I really said, okay, we're going to go into this for multiple years. I realized at a certain point, like, 'cause I was traveling from city to city, week after week, weekend after weekend workshop, teaching in China, which was a great experience, great opportunity. And there wasn't any reason why I needed to teach that much and make that much money. I was just on an automated loop, you know? And I was afraid of a few things, but I was afraid of what it might mean about me, if I really strapped in and did the work and went deep into something and found out that I was shit. Actually, I'm a bag of hot air. Actually, I have really nothing to offer people. I can't really understand things very deeply. Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe this whole methodology is built on straw. So I was afraid. I was afraid that I'm bad because I'm empty and stupid. And I would find that out if I really buckled myself in, if I strapped in and like really did the work. So you relate to that?
I relate to that.
So I avoided it for a while. I traveled around teaching like literally workshop to workshop. I didn't have a home. I was living out of a backpack. It was a great arrangement financially because the studios and gyms were paying for my flights from place to place. So I had no travel expenses. They would pay for my hotel when I stayed there. The Chinese are very generous in their hospitality, so they would often pay for my food when I was staying. And it was like expense-free living, crazy, and still really, really good income for the hours that I was teaching the workshops. So it was attractive. It was really nice. But I spent like a year and a half doing that, traveling through China from workshop to workshop, essentially just running from doing the work that I knew that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to stop teaching yoga. I knew that I wanted to go into a deeper methodology in something or multiple things. I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I knew the direction it was going, but I was hesitating to take that step. And so then something happened. I found myself in Hong Kong on a visa run. Let me phrase it this way, actually. I found myself having overstayed my visa in China, not on purpose, but by accident. Due to a technicality with the business that I was working for in Shanghai, they didn't update my visa properly. I wasn't aware of it. Overstayed, which is a big deal in China. Don't ever do that. there's serious consequences. Almost got blacklisted and wasn't able to come back, but I was able to get a stay permit, and then I was able to leave the country without any prison time, or I paid major fines, but got out. Found myself in Hong Kong with nowhere to live, no visa, knowing that I had to go back to China to teach more workshops. But then week after week passed and I wasn't getting a new visa. It was challenging. Month after month passed and I wasn't getting a new visa. Workshop after workshop got canceled. Didn't have any more workshops coming in. And then eventually my schedule was clear. And I had a moment. I was like, what am I doing? Why am I rushing back to China right now to go teach more? I don't want to teach this anymore. I don't want to teach more yoga workshops. I want to explore. I want to educate myself. I want to go deeper into the methodology. So I stayed in Hong Kong at that point indefinitely. And I started hiring coaches, gymnastics coaches, powerlifting coaches, hand balance coach, Miguel Santana. We worked together while I was in Hong Kong. And I started working with rock climbing coach as well. I was going bouldering, indoor bouldering. And I was just like, wow, there's a whole world of, because I loved physical practice. I loved movement. And that's one of the things I loved about yoga is that it related sort of an existential internal practice to a physical practice. But then I was like, I can do that with all this stuff too. I can look for better physical modalities. And so I did. And I spent months and months in Hong Kong. It was a beautiful time in my life, so amazing. And then, eventually I went back to China, and that's when everything changed. I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I found something that I need to go deeper in. So this was like maybe 4 months that I spent in Hong Kong. After that, I was like, everything's going to change now. I'm going to teach only minimally, as much as I have to eat, to survive. And I'm going to stay in the mountains in a rural area where it's really cheap. And I'm just going to go deep into the research. I'm going to practice every day. I'm going to meditate 2 hours a day. I'm going to do my gymnastics training, hand balance, calisthenics, lifting, everything. I'm going to spend time in nature. I'm going to focus on my inner experience. And I'm going to stop putting out so much and teaching so much, and I'm going to go inward and I'm going to learn. And so I did that. I also at the time enrolled in a Tai Chi school. I was practicing Chen Shi Tai Chi Chuan, which is like a Chen style Tai Chi practice, and Qigong, and was hiking all the time, climbing all the time, practicing every day on my rooftop with basic gymnastics equipment, set up a home makeshift gym setup. And I spent years there doing that, just teaching minimally, only teaching a workshop when I needed to make money. And even then the content of the workshop was very different. It's like only teaching what I was inspired to teach, not falling back on yoga methodology, but really coming from the heart and saying like, I don't have much to share with you, but this is what I'm finding valuable at the moment. And it worked. I had a lot of free time to focus on building. I invested all of my money in my time. I bought myself time. And I think that's a message that people should take away from this if they ever feel stuck in a place. Stop spinning your wheels. Don't spend your money on just getting by. Move into a cheaper place. Cut your living expenses down as much as you can. And invest whatever money you have in your own time to develop a new skill set, new traits, to look inward, to ground yourself, to set a long distance purpose. So that's what I did. That time in China, in the mountains there, was extremely healing and transformative for me. It was the best decision I ever made, but that's when I really started thinking long term, 3 years, 5 years down the road. What's it going to look like? Even now I'm still thinking in that mindset. I'm writing, nobody's paying me to write a book in Narrative Excavation. Nobody's paying me money for that. I have to dedicate my own time. I'm investing my money in my time. And then setting myself up for future ventures,
So in that time, when you were going deeper into yourself, is that where you got the vision for the next 5 years? Because at the time you knew that you didn't want to teach yoga, but then you were in Hong Kong and you were starting to hire all these coaches. And was it that point where you're like, all right, I want to go in this direction now. This is who I want to be. Like the guy before me now, the Devin before me right now, back then, were you consciously creating this version of yourself?
Yeah, I knew what I valued at that time. I didn't know exactly what it would look like or what it would feel like when I started to evolve in that direction, but I knew the direction, and I knew that it was based on my values and not of a fear of anything. You know, like a lot of my decisions when I was a yoga instructor were based on fear. A lot of my persona as a yoga teacher was based in fear. Even despite having this practice, you know, I look back on that period and I see that I was still very much controlled by my fear narratives. In many ways, I mean, less so than most people, and I was actively practicing it all the time. But still, it wasn't until this major shift where I was like, I had that space to breathe and my workshops were canceled and I was like, okay, it's time to move forward. Then I had a vision, like not in like the spiritual, what do you call that? I can't think of the word, mystic sense, not in the mystical sense, but a vision based on my values. I knew what I wanted and I knew what I wanted to give people and I knew what I wanted to experience in my life. And at least I had inklings of that. And I knew that I wanted to take steps in that direction. So I just, every day, I came to a point where I didn't want to live with myself I didn't want to live with the Devin every day who wasn't taking a step in that direction every single day, twice a day. Something small. Show up at the gym, hire a coach, do a session, learn something, read something online, read an article, research something, watch a video, something to move me in that direction. And just doing that over time, yeah, that helped to generate momentum. I didn't really have a vision of me, like the present me sitting in front of you right now. I didn't know what this would be like. It's different than I might have expected. It's interesting, the differences, but yeah.
That's cool. So you had a general vision and you just executed on the tasks that you need to do each day. You created a routine for yourself and just did the work. You immerse yourself in the practice.
Yeah, I aligned with my values, which is the thing. And this is one thing that I'm grateful for this narrative excavation practice about, because without this practice, I don't think that I would have been able to differentiate between the fears that were compelling my behaviors, the reactions that I was having to all these fear narratives, and what I actually valued when I'm free from these narratives. When these are no longer in the picture at all, what are the things that I want to experience and do while I'm alive? I don't think I could have come to that answer so clearly if it weren't for this practice. So I did that when I started to notice that workshop after workshop was canceled and I had the space. I was like, okay, now's the time. I don't know why I was waiting this long. You know, maybe it's just because workshop after workshop was booked and it was easy to keep going, you know? It was just easy to agree to the next workshop because the offers were coming in and coming in and coming in. Who wants to turn down $5,000 in a weekend?
Yep. Not
many people I know. So I'll be like, okay, another workshop, let's go. And then finally I had that space and time and I was like, okay, it's this is the moment where I can put the practice to work. I can really differentiate. I can sift out the details of what's holding me back and what I really want.
What would you say to someone who is, because this is a common thing, right? Like I've met so many people. I used to live in Thailand. Why don't you live in Thailand? Oh, I love it here. Like I'd ask them, like, why don't you live here? Like, oh, I love it here. It's great, you know, but I got a job. It pays so much money. Like, I can't leave my job. Like, yeah, you can, but it's that fear, right? It's the fear of, I don't know if you could elaborate on this, but I think it's the fear of, if I leave that, then who am I? It's like an identity crisis. It's like this. I've done this for so long. Everyone knows me as this person. And now if I leave that, now who am I? Now I got to face my, the fears. Like I could get good at this one thing that I've always wanted to do. But again, like you touched on, like I'm scared that if I get really good at the thing I actually love, maybe I'm not going to be good at it. Or there's loads of fears there.
Right. Yeah. For sure. That's the truth, is that there's many potential fears there. So it's not only necessarily like an identity crisis of like, this is who I am, and if I change it, I won't know who I am. That can be part of it, but it can be anything. It can be any one of those three categories that's causing that stress emotion, that anxiety, that fear. It can be I'm bad. It can be I'm alone. It can be or will be alone, or will be bad. It can be I'm not safe or will be unsafe if I do A, B, and C. So that's the key. That's the master key, is understanding that these are at the root of everything, all these fear decisions. And so when they're like, oh, I can't leave my job, to live in Thailand, guarantee you that their story about why they can't fits into one of those three categories if you go deep enough. So yeah, and it's also not only that, but it's like being in constant or perpetual cyclical compulsion under the influence of these fear narratives don't give you any time to really assess what you deeply want value-wise and then get positive feedback from pursuing that. So not only are you controlled and compelled by these fears, but you also don't have any reason to go pursue your values because you've never gotten rewards from them. People are simple. They want to do what feels good for the most part. Or if they do something that doesn't feel good, they want to know that there's a reward on the other side of it, right? So if they never get any positive reinforcement from pursuing their values, what reason do they have to do it?
Good point, yeah.
If they've never been rewarded for taking that kind of risk, why would they?
What fear narratives did you have? Did you have any? Like moving to the mountains? Fuck, I'm going to be alone. Did that come up at all?
No. For me, I have lots of narratives, but that wasn't one for me. I like being alone. I like spending time by myself, but for different people is different. Some people would be terrified of that, of not having anybody to talk to, and it's because nobody speaks English there where I was living. But no, for me, that was it. That was the fear narrative, was like, I'm going to go deep into this. I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to find out that I'm made of nothing. I'm just a straw person.
So what caused you to go into it then? If that was the fear, how did you get past that?
Through the process. So I noticed what that was creating for me in all the ways, not only that specific way, but all the ways that was sabotaging my progress. So it goes like this. When you notice the fear narrative when you notice the stress emotion arise, use that as an inroad to exploring what the narrative is. So when I notice thinking of moving to the mountains, I feel the stress rise up, and I'm like, oh, that's not good. What if I don't do this, and this is going to be bad, and it can wait, right? That's the initial stress response. And so you use that as a way to ask, what if I did, and it went horribly wrong? What am I most afraid of here? What would be the worst part if I moved to the mountains and I dedicated myself to this thing and it went horribly wrong? What would be the worst part about that? Ask that question again and again and again and again and again, and eventually you get down to, well, I'd find out that I'm an empty, hollow person who has nothing to offer the world. That I'm stupid, that I'm a faker, that I'm empty. And I'm a faker because I'm stupid, because I don't have anything to offer. I have to pretend to offer something, right? So ironically, think about that, Aaron, right? How fucking ironic that narrative is. I believe that I'm empty and hollow, so I never actually go deep into anything because I'm afraid I'll find that out. How's that for a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Yeah, right.
Anyway, so the process is uncover that narrative, and then I ask myself, so this gets into the later stages of the process. I ask myself, okay, so when I believe this narrative is true about myself, when I believe that I'm an empty, hollow, shallow person who has nothing to offer the world, what's that Devin like? What do I tend to think? What do I tend to feel? And what do I tend to do? What are my reactions to the narrative, in other words? So I make a list, write it all down. All the things that I would do if I believe that I'm an empty, hollow, shallow, stupid person. And I'm going to find that out if I go deep into something. And so I write all of it down. Here are the things that I avoid. Here's the things that I tend to do. Here's my body posture when I believe that. Here are my facial expressions. Here's the way I carry out conversations. Here's my patterns, right? List it all out again and again and again in as many contexts as I can. As many times as this stress emotion comes out, whether it's on paper or in my head, I make a list. I'm like, oh, that Devin would do all this. And then when I look at that list, I'm like, Jesus Christ. That is not who I want to be. That's not leading me anywhere that I want to go. But as long as I believe this is true, and I accept this as the ultimate truth, that's how I will continue to behave. That's how I will continue to act, and that's how I will continue to think, no matter what, because it's my ultimate belief. It's not unchallenged, without question. That's who I think I am. So as long as I believe that, that's how it's going to go. That's who Devin is, who believes that. That's step one. Step two is, okay, this goes back to what Gabby, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting her last name. Francis
Yeah.
touched on with her question, which is like, what's your payoff, right? What's your payoff for this? That's the second category, which is like, okay, with all of these behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that I'm doing in reaction to the narrative, what are the payoffs for each of those? What am I expecting to get? And man, when you make that list, holy Moses, it's delusional. Because it's so silly when you write it out and you're like, I'm expecting to get that from that behavior. It doesn't make any sense. No rational person would expect that to happen. But I do, I believe it. I'm like, oh, this is going to help me do this and this and this, but it often is a contradiction. I'm going to expect that I'm going to save myself from seeing that I'm an empty, hollow person by never doing anything deep or meaningful.
Yeah.
That makes sense, Devin? Really nice going. That's clever. Thanks. No. Okay, that doesn't make sense. That's not working for me. And I see that is the product of a story. It's a fiction that I've made up about myself. And I can see that because it's not an event, right? I have that skill set of saying, this is not an event. This is a story. There's no actual thing happening here. Devin is stupid, hollow, empty, shallow is not an event. It's literally a description of who I think I am. It's the definition of a story. So, okay, the story is not necessarily true, isn't leading me where I want to go, isn't producing what I think it is, or the payoffs or the price is too high. Okay, so what happens if I just play an experiment? What happens if I play this thought experiment out? And I'm just like, the narrative evaporates like a cloud in the sun. Just like, whoosh, air is clear. The narrative is no longer present, if only for a moment, right? If I don't have to believe that anymore. I've seen that it's fake, that it's an illusion, that it's a narrative, a story, a fiction. What's possible now? In this moment, when I've given up that reaction, that compulsive reaction to the narrative, what seems possible for me right now? What can I think, feel, and do now? What's available? What do I want? Okay. Wow. That's a lot of good stuff. Wow. That's a lot of good stuff. Okay, that's enormous. Wow, I was holding myself back from all of that just with the story. Okay, so let's try one thing. Let's try one of those possibilities today. Let's step into that. Let's jump over that fence. And then I get the positive emotional reward. I'm like, oh, wow, that was great. That felt amazing. Or maybe it was scary, but there's more possibilities there that I still want to explore. And I'm like, oh, there's potential there. I can see something, So it's that. It's doing, and like we talked about the strength training thing, right? We can't expect to develop this skill set in the first couple months of training. It's delusional. To get really good at this process of immediately being like fear narrative, reactions, payoffs, possibilities, switch from fear to values. To be able to do that fluently and articulately and quickly, I mean, it's a skill set that needs to be that needs to be developed over time.
That is very powerful what you just shared, because you basically distilled the process. You just laid it out. But of course, it's like anything. If I ask you, Devin, how do I put on 5 kg of muscle? You can lay out the process, but no, I got to go do the work, you know?
That's
so
right.
It's a similar thing with this.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah, it's like we talked about in other contexts. Like I can explain to you how to put on muscle or how to submit someone in jiu-jitsu, but it's conceptual, right? You can understand it intellectually, but an intellectual understanding is a very, very small part of developing an attribute. You have to develop the attribute. And the hardest parts of attributes to develop are the parts that develop slowly over many repetitions over years and years and years of practice. But that's how you get those truly exceptional performances, right? The Chinese weightlifter who studies from when he's 3 years old and is just every day weightlifting, boom, 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 weightlifting. And they seem superhuman after a time where we can't even relate to them. We're like, how could they possibly become this monster? How can this person, like I look at Dmitry, what's his name, Klokov, right? And he can hang snatch from his knees. He can hang snatch 200 kilos.
That's mad. That's insane.
And he's just, I mean, he looks like a monster too, but I'm just like, imagine having the raw power to be able to hang snatch 200 kilos from your knees. It's incomprehensible to me. My brain starts to glitch when I picture myself trying to do it, and I pick up 200 kilos in my hands. I'm like, fuck no, you know? It seems way out of my reach. But he achieved it. How? Repetition. Many years of doing this kind of thing.
I love talking about all these topics. Like I'm sure, obviously, you do too, because you know it's all linked. Like how there's a picture of you on your Instagram, and it's you. I think 2014 when you're doing yoga. Was that? Yeah, and then you. I think it was 2020 was the picture, and you're side by side, and it looks like two different people.
Yes.
And I like to geek out on this because I'm so deeply rooted in the belief that it's all of this stuff we just spoke about on this podcast that is what creates the real long lasting change, which is going into the narratives and going deep inside yourself, doing the self introspection work and really getting clear on why you're doing something, and then putting in that consistent work over time. Like that's really it. Like you did barbell back squats 3 times a week for a year. That's fucking impressive. Like that's hard work.
That's what it takes.
That's what it takes
to become truly exceptional in an attribute.
Yeah. And it's like that capacity to do hard work you've cultivated and it's growing. Like you talked about on your Instagram, you're like, you know, focusing for four or 5 hours like at a stretch.
Yeah.
Like doing the deep work. Like that you don't just stumble across that, like, oh yeah, today I'm just gonna work for 4 hours. Like you have to build that capacity up over time to where now you can sit down and write uninterrupted for 4 hours.
Right.
And you have that capacity to do the deep work because you're focusing on implementing these habits every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's such a, like, if we can get one person to take away one thing from our talk today, it's that. It's like develop a patience and a long-term mindset and a willingness to commit to that consistent work over a long time, because that's what's really going to create the changes you want. Anybody else who promises you outstanding, amazing, exceptional, elite results, notable objective changes in a short period of time, anyone who promises that to you in like a month, 3 months, a year, I mean, they're just not being, I'm sorry, but they're not being honest with you. Maybe they don't know that they're lying. Maybe they are really convinced, but they're just not, they're not telling you the truth. You know, like, please understand that the way to make changes here, and I want everybody listening to be able to make these kind of changes because it's so exceedingly easy. It's so simple. Like, you might have listened to this and think like, oh my God, it's so complicated, I'll never figure it out. It's really not. It's simple observation practice over time, being willing to observe and step back and take a moment, time after time after time, and ask yourself the questions. That's it. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's actually, if it seems too complicated, you're not doing it right. You're thinking too much about it. You're not feeling it. The answers are too heady. They're too cerebral. They're too abstract, too conceptual. The answers are feeling answers. and they don't have to make rational sense or verbal sense. Just know that this kind of work is just like you would never expect to become an elite level sprinter in a year, or an elite level sprinter by showing up like once a week, infrequently and inconsistently, right? You just would never expect that. People aren't delusional about that. But for some reason, people have this wrong understanding about introspective development. And if that's one thing I can impart to people, it's please understand this. Don't be so hard on yourself because you haven't seen results, because you haven't done the work, not consistently enough and not for long enough. You should be noticing improvement markers for sure. Like, don't wait to see progress for you're just like, it's been 3 years and I still feel terrible about myself and nothing has changed. Well, I'll just wait for another 2 and we'll see what happens. Not like that. Yeah. There should be notable markers of progress. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that if you still fall back into similar patterns, or the narrative comes up, or you feel lost at times, or you slip out of the practice and you slip out of consistency with it, it's totally normal. Think in 5 years' time. Don't think in 1 week time. Okay, so you ignored the practice for a week. Okay, but in the scope of 5 years, that's not going to matter that much. Come back, keep doing the work. Be patient with it and know that it will yield results if you're really paying attention. Yeah. Yeah,
not just do a challenge, a 30-day challenge. Man, I have such issues with that stuff.
I don't know what there is to say about that. That culture is just going to keep going as it is, and there's nothing we can do, I think.
Yeah.
There's going to be people selling. There's hucksters. Period. End of sentence.
Yeah.
And that's just going to keep happening. So.
So I'd love to talk more about movement. Maybe at a later date. But last question, I ask all my guests this question. It's always an interesting answer. Everyone's got a different answer. Mm-hmm. What is the meaning of life in your view?
I think the most interesting part about this is if you can learn anything from my perspective on narrative excavation, it's that we are the meaning makers. And the way that we make meaning and create meaning is generated from a space. And whether that space is fear or values is up to you. So the meaning of your life can be to run away from your fears, to avoid or run away from the fear that you are defective, isolated, or in danger. For sure, that can be a purpose, or that can inform your purpose. But it doesn't have to. And the answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is whatever people make it mean. So that can be fear, but it can also be values. So if you can find what your values are, when you're completely free from the influence of these compulsions that arise in response to fear narratives, if you can find these values that exist truly independent of those fears, the things that you want to do while you're alive, then that's your purpose. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I think you should value, or what Aaron thinks you should value, or what your coach or life coach or teacher or critics think you should value. If it's not what you value, it's simply not what you value. What I want to see in the world is people ruthlessly and in full power pursue their values. I want to see what that looks like, even if it's dangerous, even if it's very risky. And for some people it is very risky because they have a lot of power, and some people are not coming from a very empathetic space. But that's the risk that we pay. I believe in individualism. I want individuals to be able to decide the purpose and value of their own lives. And I think for the most part that we can converge on this. I think that we share, as humans, naturally we share a lot of values. Like if I told you what my deepest values are, I think that you would relate to a lot of them. And I think vice versa would be true. I think that if you shared to me the deepest, most important things that you want to do while you're alive, I'd probably say fuck yeah to all of them. And I'd relate and I'd say, yeah, I also want those things. And that's what's great. That's what's great. That's what's great about these values. For some reason, many of them are intrinsic to us as humans. For whatever reason, our organism takes this shape and form. It does. And so I think the meaning of life is to explore that value space and to move forward and toward them. And that looks very individual.
That's a beautiful answer. I like that a lot. And I can relate to that a lot, you know, like it's very individual. That's why I like that question, because everyone's got a different answer. And yeah, I think personally the meaning of life is you create the meaning in your life. Like there's where is it? Man's Search for Meaning, that book. I'm not sure if maybe you've read that probably.
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, it's like, to find the meaning in your suffering, you know, everything's suffering. Oh shit, I just opened up another can of worms there.
Yeah, but whatever it is, as long as people have that's the thing, is that the prerequisite to this question is awareness. If you don't have awareness of the fear narratives, then they are going to compel what you think you value.
Yeah.
They're going to control your decisions. They're going to control what you think you want. They're going to control the meaning of your life. That's the thing. So somebody who doesn't have the skill set of differentiating the narratives from their values, I mean,
that's how you waste your life achieving things that you thought you wanted, but they were out of fear.
Yeah.
So that's why that's like the worst thing in life is getting good at the wrong thing, because you could waste your life doing a thing that you didn't really know that you. It's kind of like, man, I feel like that was jiu-jitsu, but I got to rethink that, you know? Like we were talking about that example of like walking in the street, someone hits you. I got to rethink that for myself, but yeah, we can talk about this off camera as well. But yeah, thanks Devin for coming on and blessing us with your wisdom, man. It's been a great time and we've learned so much. I've learned so much, and thanks for coaching me as well on live on the call. That was unexpected.
Sure. Yeah. It's always unexpected, and like, I don't know what to expect. I feel sometimes a little bit hesitant and uncomfortable because when you coach someone about these, even if it's a casual thing, right? Like a casual example, sometimes it's like, you don't know what someone's reaction is going to be. And sometimes they can panic or they can withdraw. And so doing live coaching like that, I just try to judge it intuitively. And I'm glad that you were willing and open to doing it, because it can go horribly wrong if you don't have that relationship of like trust and openness and willingness. So thank you.
Well, you held the space, well, Bali term, held the space really well. So, thanks, man. And I'll link you up in the description and the comments, but you can go on Devin P. Kelley on Instagram. You can find him there, and links in the description. All right, so see you guys in the next one. Thanks, Devin.
Thank you, brother.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.